anybody coming today. We have our third member. Sending, yes. Where are they?
They're in an interview with Austin.
Oh, that's like Thursday.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Does she know where they are? Ira?
She's working.
Okay, so they are here. Okay. So, all right.
One down.
There. Okay, thank you.
Oh, she's already on the screen. There she is.
All right. Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's work session. And I'd like to call Dr. Watts to begin our work session tonight, please.
Thank you, President Vengadassalam, members of the board, community, staff, and Sally. Today I would like to call on our Transportation Director, Justin Dennison, who will join us for our first of two presentations, beginning with a transportation update. Justin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening. All right, we're going to get this started. Okay. Okay. All right, I'm Justin Dennison. I'm the Director of Transportation for Kent School District, and I'm going to give you an update on the transportation team and what we do. Here we go. I think. Okay. Okay, who we are, our transportation team consists of 182 dedicated employees. We have regular bus drivers, substitute bus drivers, transportation assistants, which are essentially bus aides that assist our drivers, shop personnel, which are mechanics, and operations personnel, which are routers, dispatchers, administrative assistants, and administrators. What we do is support the KSD blueprint by safely transporting students to and from school every day. We have 129 bus routes that transport 10,000 students per day. The 10,000 student number is an actual count. We do 3 counts a year where our drivers physically count every student that gets on the bus that day. If we were to look at the number of students who are actually assigned a bus route, that number is closer to 14,000. We also complete 1,200 annual field trips, athletic trips, and after-school activity routes. Tonight, I'm going to discuss driver training and recruitment, inclusive education transportation, and out-of-district transportation. Okay, first, our driver training and recruitment. What does it take to become a school bus driver? That is a call we get very frequently from the public and interested people who want to become school bus drivers. It takes about 80 hours of commercial driver training, which is a federal mandate, and 40 hours of district policy and procedure training. Within that district policy and procedure are many OSPI topics that relate to school bus driving. We have all of our training on site. We have a dedicated driver trainer, and we are also fortunate in our school district to have an employee who is a CDL tester on staff. So this year we've hired 14 new drivers. We received 40 applications, which produced 14 drivers, and we have 2 currently in progress. Some of the challenges that we have with recruiting is there's some upfront costs that our applicants have to be aware of. They've got to get a physical, a drug test, supply their driving record, take written CDL tests, and pay for FBI fingerprinting. We do reimburse them for their physical and drug tests after they work 40 days. But it also takes 3 to 4 weeks to complete the training, and typically 2 months before they receive a paycheck. In 2016, we started a training completion stipend, which has been very helpful for the drivers making that transition. And we're upfront on what they can expect. 4 hours a day is what a driver usually starts out at, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and they can expect about 20 hours a week. For our training, we have an annual in-service day, which is OSPI mandated. And then we put on 3 district-directed workshops every year. In addition to that, 10 driver safety meetings, which are a half-hour long. This was bargained. And we select the topics that are typically hot-button issues to cover. This is a list of the last 2 years of OSPI mandated in-services. A lot of it is related to student management and working with special needs students. Our district workshops are also highly focused on student management and working with our students. I'm going to move on to inclusive education transportation. Out of our 129 bus routes, 36 of them are inclusive education. We have 590 students that are assigned to buses, and when we do our counts, we're averaging about 490 that drive per day. Did I delete her?
Sorry,
We
Justin,
we
we
lost
may have lost
We
Debbie.
lost
Yeah,
her, so
sorry.
I need to get her back. It says we're connected. but
Retry.
I'll retry.
I did too, I just didn't see her disappear off the screen.
Yes. And I'm currently communicating with her by text to make sure she's aware. So pardon the technical difficulties. We'll keep you posted.
It says she is offline.
That's okay.
All right, Justin, I know it's never easy to present during
You're doing great.
interruptions.
Okay, we're getting closer.
I don't know if we are. Okay, I'm going to try it all over again.
Okay. Debbie's just indicated she's losing internet, going in and out, so it's on her end. She did give us permission to move forward,
Okay,
and I'll keep in touch with her.
okay.
Yeah, we have a recording, so she can.
Sorry.
Thank you for your efforts.
Sorry.
I'll find it. Okay, I'll pick back up with inclusive education transportation. So we're averaging about 490 students riding per day, actual number. We also have 50 students that are riding an American Logistics car, a company that we have a contract with, and 37 of the students are transporting to an out-of-district school, and 13 of the students are being transported within our district. This is a snapshot of our inclusive education transportation by program. The support center has the most number of students receiving transportation. This is all bus riders, none of the American Logistics car service. Out-of-district transportation. Out-of-district transportation consists of inclusive education students who are placed out of our district, McKinney-Vento, and foster care. Okay, so we are transporting students to about 20 specialized schools outside of our district. On buses, 25 students are being transported on 5 buses, and the remainder are being transported on American Logistics car service. McKinney-Vento, we have a shared responsibility with our neighboring districts to ensure that we are transporting students to their school of origin. And so we speak with them regularly, and we have a couple of guidelines that we use for AM and PM transportation. If we can't get that worked out, we split billing. And then we also have a relationship with Auburn where we each just transport our own students that attend our schools. And then in some cases, other school districts, they also use American Logistics. And so they set it up and they split the billing for us, which is convenient. For this school year right now, we have 258 KSD students that are receiving McKinney-Vento transportation. Those are students in our schools. And we are also transporting 156 students who reside within Kent School District, but their school of origin is outside of our district. This is a snapshot of 5 years of McKinney-Vento transportation costs. This includes riding on school buses. This is time and miles. This is American Logistics contract. This is Orca cards, all within that total. Foster care, in 2015 with ESSA, we have begun transporting foster care students very similar to McKinney-Vento, ensuring that their school of origin is consistent for them. And this is a snapshot of number of students that we've been transporting from 16-17 to 2018. That number has doubled. And right now at 32 students, we will continue throughout this school year to be getting more foster care students. Any questions?
Right. Anyone like to begin?
McKinney-Vento is paid for completely by government. It's not coming out of our funds, is that right, or?
So
Portions. It's underfunded.
One of those unfunded mandates?
Unfunded.
yeah. So we report all of our transportation expenses to OSPI, and we receive the reimbursement for those funds the following year. So everything that we're spending this year for transportation will be received will be the number we received for the following year. So when we have years where there's large jumps, then our school district is funding that balance for that year.
Also, how many people who are applying, you may not know this, applying to be bus drivers already have their CDLs?
I would say that number is very low. It's very low. It's occasional that we do have maybe somebody relocate from even another state, and that is transferable, or they come from another district because they've moved closer to Kent, and it happens other ways around too, where we lose a driver because they move somewhere else. But the number is very low. We're training most of our drivers to be first-time school bus drivers. Some have CDL, maybe a Class B, but they don't have the school bus endorsement, so they've got some experience driving a commercial vehicle, but not an actual school bus, and they have to retake the CDL.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah.
So Justin, what is the turnover rate for bus drivers? I know that a lot of times I hear in our district and others that there's a bus driver shortage, and which kind of impacts some of the ability to do field trips and those types of things.
Yeah.
With time restrictions and then I have a second question, but go ahead if you want to answer.
I don't have the turnover rate handy right now. I can provide you with that number. I would say that we have a number of drivers who this is a second career or a retirement career, and they end up retiring, or they have a couple years that they want to do. But I'll have to get the number for retention for you.
Yeah, and I was just kind of curious, it's kind of a ballpark, if that's an issue. Do you tend to keep bus drivers pretty well? I mean, do they tend to stay? Is there kind of a...
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is some turnover, and a lot of it has to do with a split schedule. You know, it has to fit a certain, they have to have other supports in their life a lot of time to be able to maintain the job of a school bus driver, because it is, we tell them up front, it is a part-time seasonal job. There's 190 days of pay, and the average day for a school bus driver is about 5 hours. So.
And then with your, when you were talking about like including the field trip, so the money that's spent on transportation, did that include, I was trying to see if it was just for McKinney-Vento that you shared?
Yes, I
Okay,
just
that was
included
just
the,
for- okay.
yeah. And with field trips and athletics and after-school runs, those are all funded from some other source from a school. The school has a source, a budget for that, and then we bill the school.
And do we often have to charter? I mean, are there a lot? Because I see a lot of
Occasionally.
charter buses. Is that
Yeah,
something?
occasionally we do with athletics. Last year, we spent about $12,000 chartering buses for athletics. Schools themselves, if we don't have availability, they will have to reach out to a charter company, and I don't have the number of what that is. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When you sort of mentioned, I don't know if you know, when you're talking about driver turnover, you know about driver tenure, how long do we keep our drivers? Our drivers has 7 years of experience, whatever that is, if you know offhand, if not, for the future.
The average driver has been here for about 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I don't have a slide number, but when you show the annual McKinney-Vento transportation expense, it's going up each year. Do we know how much of that is ridership, meaning we're having to transport more people, or the actual costs of each ride because we're having to contract more, whatever that is?
Mm-hmm.
Do we know the split of that?
Well, it's typically more riders, more students that we're transporting. The numbers for, like, the cost for American Logistics has not increased substantially over the years. Our time and miles, we have, when drivers' wages increase, it affects the hourly rate. And then we also have the mileage rate for the bus, which includes fuel, maintenance, all the upkeep. That number gets adjusted every year between 3% and 5%. So.
Thank you, that was all.
Okay. And how far are we sending our students through, whether it's the logistics or?
Yeah, we send some students to Kirkland. There's a specialty school in Kirkland. There's McKinney-Vento students in Seattle. There's also students down as far south as Fort Lewis, Lakewood area. Yeah, so it's a regional approach that we have to take on that.
How do you budget for that? I mean, just, like, do you
Well,
look at previous years?
previous year is the main thing that we look at. We can never quite predict where a student will live outside of our district and when that will happen. So, yeah.
Let's talk. All right. Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Justin, well done. Thank you. And I would like to take a personal point of privilege to say thank you to you, certainly our teams. I know that our Chief School Operations Academic Support Officer is not here in spirit, and to staff, Dave Buzzard, for our operations safety team, given our most recent
Yeah.
snow event. We appreciate all of the extra time and effort and care for our community, our students, and our staff, and we thank you for your leadership.
Yes, thank
Well
you
done.
to all our
Thank you.
bus drivers.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
At this time, I would like to call on our Chief Accountability Officer, Dr. Jewel Harmon, who will present the second of our two presentations this evening with an organizational effectiveness update. We are goal 3, in other words. Dr. Harmon, the floor is yours.
There's not a link to this on
I was just checking on Debbie to see if she was available.
She said she's going to be offline.
But-
She'll review, and then we'll pick her back up during
the. I was saying about this
executive session.
on
I just thought I'd check while we had a quick gap before I started. I was like, I'll check in.
We had a print out.
Okay, all right. Good evening. President Venkatasalam, members of the board, Dr. Watts, Ms. Howley. Thank you, Justin, for giving me the gift of 9 minutes, even with some technical difficulties. I appreciate it. There's 3 things that we need to talk about that just happen to live in the organizational effectiveness community that I'd like to try to get through in our limited amount of time. And it's discussion around the scope and the details of the audit RFP to make sure we've gotten that correct before we put it out to the public. The other is policy 1250, students on the governing board. I know you all would like to move forward with that, although there's some other policies that need to be addressed as well. And then the larger idea of policies and updates and what we need to do to move forward. So those are the 3 topics very quickly. And so I'd like us to dive into the audit RFP. I have a slide, but it's really just for us to go through, and I gave you the handouts there of what we used as your document to build out this RFP scope. And it was the document that was attached to the December 12th, 2018 agenda item 4.02 when you all took the action to approve us moving forward with an audit RFP. So you don't necessarily need to take an action tonight, but I can't discuss the content of the RFP with you unless we do it in either a work session or regular meeting. So I'd like your feedback on the timeline, the dates, the scope, so that we can make sure it's correct before we put it out. And so the floor is you all's to discuss and provide guidance.
Well, I just have a question. We're given 3 weeks approximately for people to respond. How are we sending this to anyone? Typically, or how do we plan on doing it?
So she's ready? Sorry.
Well, no, she wants me to turn the camera to,
Oh, to this so she can see. Oh. So we typically advertise out. We don't necessarily send it to firms to do that. The 3-week window, it could be longer, but because you all are choosing the company that does this, it can only happen during a regular meeting because you have to take an action. It can't happen at a work session. And so March 22nd was the next regular meeting, given a reasonable window for someone to develop a quality proposal and get it submitted for you all's review. The next date after that would be April 24th's regular meeting. So that's why I kind of put those 2 dates there. And that's why I said it's, I wanted you all to consider what option you wanted, knowing that the decision had to be made during a regular meeting because you actually have to take you have to discuss it and then actually take an action to approve or select the company. So the date of when it's due is partially driven by the time constraints of the regular meeting calendar and enough time to reasonably develop a quality proposal.
Yeah, I think it's fine, because I'm also looking at page 12, the tentative
Sure.
schedule for how this lines up of, okay, we get it out there, then we'll interview, then we'll award, and then we're talking May is the idea to start.
And I tried to, so again, that timeline was questionable to me. I kind of did that because it's like, okay, well, if it takes this long for them to meet, theoretically, then they've got to take the action. That'll happen in April. They'll award the contract and that'll go out, depending on whether or not this happens at the March meeting and the decision's made, or it happens at the April board meeting and the decision is made. So it's kind of dependent upon what date those RFPs are due and what's you all's decision as a board to have that discussion during a regular meeting and take an action on selecting a company. as to whether or not the actual timeline on page 12 could happen sooner, the actual work could start sooner than May of 2019.
So because we're looking at times, we're looking at evaluation. I'm looking at section E. Where, I think it says, we're doing the evaluation.
Yes, yes. And so that was another question of the weights that are listed there under that evaluation section, is really a value judgment of what the board feels is important in a quality proposal. It's somewhat a little bit of equal weighting in terms of the balance between the price response, the technical response, and the qualifications of the company in terms of their experience. Although you all could decide as a group to weight more heavily the quality of the proposal or their qualification and experience, or the importance of the cost of the overall proposal.
And references, things like that for past performance, I guess. Would be important.
You said we'd advertise out. What does that mean? How would we?
So we usually post, and we post them on the website. There's usually a formal posting. I think we have to post it in person on a sign of district property saying that we have RFPs out. And so typically companies that are interested in doing business with the district will look at our website and know. We don't necessarily go out seeking companies or saying that you do this work and by the way, we have an RFP and we want you to apply. That's not what we do. So when I say we advertise, it really is kind of, we put it out there, not in the same way, but similar to when we are hiring for staff. They have to come to our website to see what positions we're hiring for and seek it out from us. We're not necessarily going out recruiting people to do this. We are just posting when I say advertise.
So I guess for me, I'd like a discussion on the evaluation of this and the scoring, if we're comfortable with what's here, or if you prefer, the weight is reallocated or allocated differently.
I would say, when I think about what I'm looking for, I know that price is important, but I would put less weight on price and more weight on qualifications. Just because of the subject matter of what we're talking about. I know a lot of companies that do this, but not necessarily know how to do it for a public entity or for a school or something like that. And so they may give us a good price because they want business, but they're not qualified. So I consider, I guess, reallocating price to qualifications.
Do we even want to have a percentage in the price? Leave that open?
Well, I think with our budget concerns, I think we probably should have, so that should be a piece of a part of it, right?
But we're saying that if your price is good, then that's
So maybe that
going
could
to
be a
enter.
10% allocation, right? And then move a higher percentage to the qualification and experience.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe.
Sounds appropriate.
Catch that,
Yes, and I have someone in the audience taking notes for me as well, and I usually have Pam go back and listen to the recording to make sure we don't miss anything as well, so.
I'm good with that. Karen?
So are we saying 10%? Is that what we're looking at for price?
Right, so I would say reduce it
that'd be
by
reasonable.
20%, reallocate that evenly between technical
Technical and
and qualification, then going to 40%. Not one thing individually is half, but, the majority, 80% of it is going to be on technical and qualification experience.
Yeah, I agree.
And I know there's an extra 10% there for the response, technical response, that I would really put it on performance, past performance. I don't know what your thoughts are, but it has to be allocated somewhere.
Thinking under references or industry, or just,
Yeah, under performance, technical response performance.
so what, that means, like, what are they going to do? As far as this, because this is not, so when you said
Well, they
past
can do our
performance.
audits, but are they going to give us the recommendations that will help us resolve some of our, how much review, just in general sense, what has been their performance in working with clients, in reviewing, are they thorough in their review of data, that sort of thing. 'Cause there are a lot of firms out there, but can we say that they're up to par?
Right, that they have, they have the methodology, but do they have the output based, do they have the results?
And do they have the technical knowledge of a school district, which is very different from,
Okay.
So if we're looking at the quality of the proposal, how is that different from them sharing a whole bunch of qualifications and experience and having their technical response?
So when I see that, I think of the quality of the proposal, making sure they address all of our concerns and all of our requirements, that they're very thorough, that they provide enough information, that they cover the scope of work completely that we want them to do. So that's why I see the quality of the proposal. It's how making sure they're addressing all of the requirements in the proposal is what I see that being.
But it said in here that they'd be tossed out if they don't address everything.
Well, we
So-
decide that,
So
because that's kind
thoroughly.
of us.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's a measure of saying, do we toss, we'll make that decision with our quality
Okay.
criteria.
Just FYI, Vice President Strauss is now on speakerphone, and she can see through live stream. So
Okay,
Oh, good.
Debbie, you're there?
maybe?
Debbie?
mute, unmute.
Okay. Well, I trust she can at least hear. How about that?
Yes, do we want to specify some expertise in, we are looking at a school district, this is not an audit of a corporation. Do we want to get more specific? I feel the need to do that, but,
Yes, I am.
oh, there you are.
So I'm just wondering, so thinking
Can
about,
you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Okay, good. Yes, I can. There's a little bit of delay between the two, so it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
so I'm
Should that be
wondering,
added under experience, the fact that it needs to be with some school district experience?
well, I'm thinking that since we are a school district looking for it, they would have that, that's just my thought, that they would naturally understand that.
Yeah, not necessarily, I think.
Yeah, I don't,
After,
yeah,
I mean, it's just clarifying it
yeah.
more.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm reading under this sample factors that we're talking about, and they say in general, familiarity with area, that's fine. Relevant to RFP work scope kind of gets into it, but I think it is, we would want similar projects with similar clients or something like that.
So on here, it says Kent School District is seeking proposals from firms and agencies that provide independent audit services to K-12 school districts and/or other government entities. Maybe if we left it, should we leave the "and/or" out? And just leave it specific to school districts, so that we're clear? Or have experience? I'm wondering if we could put it more clear in that area? Kind of spell
Well,
it out a
then
little
are
clear, a
we
little more clearly.
limiting? I don't know. It's one thing if, where did you see that? Vinnie?
It's at the
So
first
the
terms
bottom
and conditions, the
of
scope.
D. So sort of like, do we want to qualify it with the scope? And
Right.
say, make sure you fit in the scope
I
before
would
you
rather-
submit, or qualify it in the criteria after they submit?
What are your thoughts?
I think we need to keep it open.
Okay.
But we need to understand that they have a good understanding of auditing school districts or school
So I'm wondering, how do we then clarify that if we don't,
issues.
if we don't specifically? Maybe we could say
Well, that's,
preferably,
again,
or,
going into industry reputation, I think that's important. I mean, we're not going to be necessarily looking for, let's say Ernst & Young. They have great reputation, but what's your reputation? Auditing a school district. what's your understanding of auditing a school district? I don't know. So I think we should keep that open, but maybe assign a percentage on where it says experience, we have 15%. Relevant, we can add the word relevant experience. And bump that up. I mean, that's a thought.
Right, because we'll know that we are gonna, it's not just any experience, we're gonna evaluate them on the relevant experience to the subject matter we're talking about.
So we're bumping that up
So,
percentage-wise?
Well, that would,
I mean, I would.
if we move 40 there, I think that naturally bumps to 20, assuming we split it evenly.
Do we want to do that?
Yeah,
I
that's
would
what I'm saying.
almost
Do we
say,
wanna do it
yeah,
evenly?
split it. I feel like the relevant experience is more important. Well, I don't know, reputation is important, but what's the thought?
So they go up to 2020 is what we're thinking?
20.
That's what I'm thinking,
Yeah, just go up to 2020 for the qualification experience.
yeah.
Okay, so with regards to technical response, the function, say 10, performance, I'd say 20. Do we want to put past performance there?
Call it past performance rather than performance?
Wouldn't that still fall under
Reference.
references and industry experience? Wouldn't that still fall under that?
Sort of, when I think about it, it's more of like, how do you perform from a technical aspect? Like, how do you bring resources to the table? How do you, what is your methodology for doing, blah, investigating this? Something like that. So that's what I look at, but in performance, again, you're also looking for them, what are their outcomes that they've done in the past? It's kind of the same.
Right, and so
Yeah,
I
maybe
would
we
think-
need to just take that out and.
Because that falls
make it
also
a
under
bit-
function and service, right? How do they plan to do what they're doing? Performance, I think about past, that's my thought, is the past performance.
Yeah, I almost feel like we just need a technical response and a qualification and experience. And, you know, it'd be 40-40 and dividing it, I mean, it's going to be pretty tricky because we're
Yeah.
going to say, well, this belongs over here.
Right, if the score can't be split evenly,
Yeah.
then we can just pull this up, criteria.
But we can keep that in mind, that those are the three things we're looking for, but not necessarily split the,
Necessarily give them weightings.
yeah.
Okay. I'm good with that.
Debbie, do you have any thoughts?
So I think that what I heard you say is that we're keeping technical response at 40, but you're eliminating the three things underneath it, and then qualifications and experience at 40, is that correct?
Right, I mean, we can keep these
Yeah.
things in mind, but we don't have to weight it
We have to assign
separately.
the weights to them.
That's fine. I did have one question, and it's probably, if it's okay if I ask it really quick.
Sure.
It has to do with the scope of work. So are we asking them to give us a scope that would include all three audits? Or just one to start with, knowing that we might need others?
What is your read on it?
So I'm sorry, what do I read as when I look at it?
Yeah.
In the specification, it looks like all three, but then on the scope, under, on page 8, the scope seems to indicate just the performance audit, so that's where my question came up.
And if the others are needed, then we would go for those. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, well, there's the sentence at the bottom says, hey, based on the findings of this portion, we'll determine the scope of the other portion.
But if you look at, on page, under C, it gives all three.
That's more, that was intended to just be a definition section of what we expect.
Scope of work, so specifications and scope of work.
terminology.
Okay, so you're saying that,
But both of them are
but
mentioned in
it's-
this final
yeah, they're
paragraph
both
down
under
here, they're
the-
all mentioned.
right,
It kind of lays out doing the performance management audit first,
I see during the
and
findings.
then do the financial audit,
Got it.
and then as directed, we will determine, BOD, that's us, we'll determine the need for a more specific detail, granular level on specific areas.
So that
So it would
the
be-
bid they're giving us is going to be for all three.
For all three, it's definitely for the two, performance management and financial audit. And at least the way this goes out, we've lined them up saying, do this one first, performance management audit, then do the financial audit, and then be prepared to do the other as directed. So yes, it would be all three.
And so then what was your concern again, Debbie?
I couldn't hear you, Denise.
Oh, I just said,
She
so
said,
what
what was
was
your
your concern
concern?
again? So can you repeat it one more time so I can understand?
Yeah, so my question was, I wasn't clear when I read it. Most of the information, I understand the definitions of the top, but when I read on page,
8, component.
on page, starts on page 7 and goes on to 18, where it talks about the components of the, so components of the scope of possible approach, whether we were asking them to bid all three at one time, or whether we were asking them to bid the performance management, knowing that we may then direct to do the other audit.
I see what you're saying. So think about the components and scope portions are specifically, well, the component says performance management audit. And then the scope on the subject matter kind of focuses under that area too.
Which is fine if we do it that way. I just think it needs to be clear
Yep.
that we're doing this one, and then, because it would be hard for somebody, I would think, to bid out other parts that it was being determined on that unless they did it strict as time and material estimation.
So, but when you go to page 14, where it says proposals are subject to the requirements, it says, please attach proposal submission including all pricing and details and components as specified in section C, specification scope of work, which include all three.
It does. It's more detailed on the performance management audit. And so I can see from their side, they could say, okay, what is, you talk about a financial audit, but right now, all I know is a time frame in the scope. Which is fine, maybe that's all we want them to.
What would be their typical, charge for forensic audit, depending on how much time?
Well, we're asking for pricing for all three, though.
Right,
So-
right.
Right,
So
usually
I think we
based
can
on-
give.
I think, yeah,
The area or mess, yeah.
Right,
okay.
yeah, specific areas we want them to look at, specific policy,
Yeah.
for example. Yeah, that might give us a sense of what, and, I mean, I would think that, would there be an opportunity for them to ask questions? How does that work? Or no?
How we built that
Process.
So there's a couple of places where that could happen. So one of those is in that kind of generic timeline, I think it was on page 12. It talks about a portion where there's interviews with selected respondents, where you can ask them questions, they can ask them questions. There's also a point in here, there's a couple of places that talk about how they can contact different district staff if they have questions. And so throughout what it says is, I could provide support if they need additional forms, if they don't understand the RFP process, if they have questions about the timeline of the submission of the proposal, and those kinds of pieces. It then directs questions about the content to the board. And the way that we were going to handle that was that all submissions would be posted and included in you all's share space on StaffLink. That way it allows you all to have access to read the proposals, but it prevents you from providing comment, so it's not an open meeting. You're not violating open public meeting by having discussion through that portal. It also, if they send an email to the board, we can hold those and then you can discuss them or think about how you'd want to do that at a regular meeting of how you'd like to respond to that respondent if they had a particular question about the content or the scope. Or you could decide to allow staff to answer that if you would prefer. But that was one of my other questions is, in terms of those pieces, if they have technical questions about the scope or the authority as it relates to your perception as a board, it would be best addressed by you all as a board, but how would you like that handled was one of my questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally it should be in writing, whether it comes
Okay.
from us or the district, everything should be in writing. So.
Does that mess with the timeline then, if we got a March 22nd date? I mean, is that snail mail back and forth? Okay.
I mean, typically, if you're going to respond, I would think you'd have your questions in within the first week or so. I would wonder if we have the opportunity to at least review the questions at a work session earlier that week, 20th, if anybody has questions, or an earlier board meeting. I mean, again, it's up to them if they want to respond, but usually if they have questions about what does this mean, they'll ask those early on, and that we should have them
We
in enough
could
time.
have a work session. Oh, so yes, there's also a question about, thank you, Dr. Watts, a question about who should receive the actual proposals. And this, there was a indication that it would be Dr. Harmon, and we have specifically, I think at a work session, stated that it would come to the board. So that is a challenge, how we do that, because I mean, one thing that can happen is that, you know, it could be gathered at the, with Karen, and then all of us get a copy or of it. We could do it that way. But we have specifically said that it would come to the board, and I want us to be careful how we handle that moving forward. What are your thoughts on that?
The RFP process itself, we certainly just from the beginning, that is run, that can be run through the normal accountability office, or the organizational effectiveness, is that it just goes through that. It's in regular normal services. The administration of the RFP can go through there. And then once it's received in a central point, then it comes to us.
But the central point is the question.
And I think I'm comfortable thinking that no one's going to edit it before it gets to us. But just to the point that this is like a regular RFP for other services. As a vendor, they would expect a central point that is not a group of people like us who aren't available as often to talk about it and respond.
Point of clarification, the submissions for the RFP come in hard copy. So when they're uploaded, they would be scanned in and uploaded. So not that, I won't say that anything is ever impossible, but it reduces high likelihood that someone would alter a hard copy version of something. It's getting uploaded to your staff link site. And so you will see all of that submission. And we would retain the hard copies for you all's perusal when you all were gathered together for that discussion conversation. So you could still see it's required here, 3 hard copies. You'd have that available to look at as well, to verify. So.
And the rationale, just for clarification, the rationale is that there is a line of demarcation, some separation between the administrative process of literally receiving the document and doing our best to minimize, if not eliminate, any concerns regarding the most important aspect, which is the assessment, the judgment, and the final recommendation, which is the board's responsibility. That's the rationale for this process.
That makes sense.
And so, like, personally, when I'm thinking about it, I'd want to buffer, like, if somebody responds faster, I don't want to start looking at their response before I know who else has responded, so I want to say collect them all. March 22nd comes, 5 p.m. Okay, now we can look at all that's been collected.
Agree with that.
Debbie, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree that I don't see a problem with them being sent to the Chief Accountability's office to be collected, and then I agree with Ross that I don't really want to see any of them until they've all been collected until after the deadline. It allows for bias to start seeing things early.
Okay. Yeah, the only question here is where should be the collection point, not when it'll be distributed, but where is the collection point?
Oh, well,
So,
Well, see, I worry if the collection point's us, then it comes directly to us and we don't control when that happens.
no, it would go through Karen, is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. I'm
but if
fine.
it's a submitted,
Fine.
completed, and signed proposal sealed, document sealed to the chief accountability officer at that address,
Right.
then I don't see a problem with that.
Okay. All right. And then, what do we decide on the RFP questions? Do we want to have a work session to state to the bidders that this is the date that?
I would recommend, because this is slightly different than the typical RFP process, because the board is the decision maker and there's rules around your public meetings and all of that piece, that it happened that way, because there's RCW that says that if questions are asked by submitters, they have to be shared with all to ensure that one proposal submitter does not have information that another did not get because they failed to ask the question. So it would be best.
We can have even a Thursday meeting if we don't have a Wednesday, you know.
It would be best to keep from violating that RCW to do it that way. Then that would ensure that all are available. And it would also ensure, if we needed to, we could set up the kind of set it and forget it recording so that all could also access it at a later point if they wanted the answer to that question again.
Yep.
So,
Sounds good.
Right. Thank you, this has been a lot of work, and do you have any other questions? Do you have
Nothing else.
no, I appreciate it. It's much better to have the clarity now on the front end so we get it right before we put out the proposal than to get the feedback afterwards. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
The next, I'm sorry, Karen, I should have been handing this to you. It's rather quick, but it is important and pressing, given where we are with our students on the board and your commitment to that work. I think Melissa mentioned this in the communications update about the status of where they were with that process of applications. And the students had a concern about the time commitment, and it was coded in policy. So it begs the question of, can we change that language to possibly alleviate some of that burden for students? And the language, you have the handout there. The sentence is very simple. It speaks to, I think the first sentence of the second paragraph says very simply that students must attend all meetings. And that's every Wednesday. Some of those are long. That's a large commitment for students that are typically involved in other activities as well. And so I wanted to get your feedback on what you thought about that, and then posed a suggestion here on the slide that's a little bit wordy, but it does get to the idea of they have a responsibility to participate as an active member, how that happens, and then what they need to do if they're going to miss a meeting. And then the students have spent quite a bit of time developing procedure around how they would govern themselves. And so they could write into some procedure how they would like to inform the board if they're going to be absent or what actions they need to take. And they would share that with you all during our informational procedural session. But I'm open to whatever you'd like to suggest, but wanted to alleviate that for students if that was something that was holding up participants or volunteers or applicants.
Yeah, we were just actually talking about that, because I agree. I think that's a lot for students, and so I actually like the verbiage that you've changed it to. I think that makes a lot more sense, and I think it will open up our pool a little bit more if students feel like they don't have to do a weekly meeting for hours, potentially.
Okay. Is there other?
I think that's good.
Debbie?
That's fine.
Okay.
So you'll likely see that, not obviously at this next board meeting in a few minutes, but at the next regular meeting, you'll see this on the discussion and approval with the language changed, and you'll see the track changes so that you'll know what's there.
Yeah, thank you.
And the last piece is because I knew we wouldn't have time for real policy updates, and we do need to get that work done. So I wanted to kind of just lay out where we are with this as a landscape for the school year in terms of our policy update. Rather quickly, at the beginning of the school year, we identified 52 policies that needed to be updated and reviewed. We've done approximately 10 hours of policy discussion over the course of this school year so far. And we've adopted 10 policies. There's 37 that are kind of in the queue to be updated. And I've looked at another 14 that are probably essential to us starting our 19-20 school year. They either relate to student academics, student safety, some things with staff that are probably just good for them to have current. And then outside of those, there's still an additional 105 that are encouraged or discretionary that would need to be updated. So needless to say, there's work to do. We have 2 work sessions left this school year that are on the books. March 20th for 90 minutes and May 8th for 120 minutes. Oh, May 1st, I'm sorry. But it is 120 minutes. So either way, I get the 2 hours. And this is a list of those that I kind of said were essential to the school year. I'll make sure that you have the full PowerPoint and we get it posted on Board Docs as well. And some of them are value-driven, others are because they are just, some of them are very out of date given the topic, and so might be good to deal with some of those. Other policy priorities based on either comments from the public, concerns that the board have addressed. This is why this group shows up. And so based on that, that leaves us with kind of where do we go? And I've heard you all talk about this too, the idea of using WASDA policy consulting services. And so this outlines the type of consulting service that you all have described in your work sessions before, and if you considered. It's about $9,000, I believe, is the price they've quoted. What it does is it does the WASDA update with track changes. It does not prevent or reduce the amount of time that the board would spend having work sessions per se or going through them and discussing them. It just does the update work. But as I said, we have 50 waiting to be reviewed that have the WASDA updates. So this is about a little bit of, okay, if this is done, then building in the time of work sessions, which has been our challenge because we've scheduled them and then either pressing things come up or we are, there's just so many with the load. It's just not, I mean, it just is. You can't get through 100 in 4 work sessions. So.
Dr. Harmon, do we know how many of those policies are actually WASDA policies? Because some of them on there I know are specific to the district. And so WASDA would not have an update for.
No, they wouldn't, but 2/3 are WASDA. So 2/3 of yes, easily
so,
100 are WASDA updates that are, even though WASDA may not say that they are essential, they may be.
So there's legal language. There's,
yes.
Okay, and so for the ones that are not, we would still be responsible for.
Even longer. So that would be, and so that means that we would come to a policy work session without even track changes, and it would be a conversation about value judgments and really going through, and as you all of a board are discussing that, making those track changes and kind of capturing that in those moments because there's nothing to go off of. So and then going back then to what is the legal statute around this idea. So that adds more time to those kinds of policies.
So what about those that are written? So like, for example, let's take the race and equity policy. That wasn't written by the board. That was written by a committee. So would it go back to that committee then to review? Because I don't know that I would be comfortable necessarily as a board making changes to a policy that we didn't write. So that one is a slight exception, and that committee has actually been working, and they have some suggested revisions for the board that will likely come to you during one of these 2 work sessions. But most of the ones that are discretionary are not always committee-driven. Some of them were value judgments of leadership, and I can't say what leadership because I wasn't here, but they're not necessarily committee-driven. That one is one that is committee-driven, and so they would bring to you that recommendation of those changes, and then that would give you a springboard of discussion around those value judgments and statements. And so those that are leadership driven, because like I said, I'm thinking that my thought is the way that, well, the way it would work for me logically is whatever department that policy supports would be the people to review that policy and then bring it to us for approval. So that, including that timeline and process in this.
So that happens in the background.
So that's
before they get to
it gets
you,
to us.
yes.
Okay.
So before any of them have gotten to you, typically what happens is Sharn, our policy intern, has done the WASDA update track changes piece. And once that's done, we typically forward it along to the KSD community that is most directly associated with the work. Sometimes it goes to multiple people because it may have a labor implication even though it's about students. And then those groups review, they provide their feedback. Sometimes Sharon or I may even have questions about the RCW or something around it, and it may go to Tim just as reference. So that happens in the background even still. If WASDA did the updates, we could still add that in. So even if we went the consulting services, those kind of things still happen. So in terms of checking with staff to see if there are any other district kind of value judgments or statements, but that does happen right now. They do the check to make sure that there might be procedural issues with what is written there. So we do that check.
We're at 6:30.
Yes, I mean, I apologize. It's not necessarily something that needs to take an action, but it was just for your discussion and consideration. So thank you for that.
Do we need to take some action in open meeting about the $9,000?
You could continue discussion, or we could pick that up at the next policy work session if you choose. I could add that to the agenda then, or.
I'm just thinking if the sooner we do it, the better, it's because so they can get started with it. But
Yeah, we'll do that. We can do that at a regular meeting. This is for discussion. We can do that at a regular meeting.
Yeah, okay. 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 All right.
yeah, that's, I knew we were not going to do it now, but I just, can we put it on the agenda in half an hour?
Okay, so, thank you, Dr. Harmon. So we will recess the work session for an executive session for approximately 30 minutes to discuss with legal counsel representing the district litigation or potential litigation to which the district is likely to become a party, and to discuss the qualifications of an applicant for public employment. Back. Yep.
Future meeting, put that on. Next regular.
We're first. After they're gonna do two proclamations first. So I'm not sure we can decide 7:30. We'll meet when we finish. Yeah. So 7:30, maybe 7:30. She's a sophomore at I'm Lila. Hi, Renee. Are you the district event? Yeah. What do you do? Oh, great. That's a challenging job. You must be the man. Hey, how are you? Good. How about you? Hi, how are you? She's part of it. Yeah, that's right. She just joined like at the beginning of the first It's white. Do you know Fatima? She's at Kentwood. Yeah. I believe. Well, we're based here in we're technically statewide, so our focus is Suffolk County, there's one other County, and then we have some work that we do statewide, like education and some work in program. And we also use our program in California. So we're more recently statewide in California, there's no state except. So Alameda County, Sacramento, Stockton area, San Jose, and then Fresno and Kern. Like the challenge, right? Do you have a card? Yeah, thank you.
The meaning of life? Yes. Oh, you gonna sleep over that one? Yeah. Thank you. It's here somewhere. That should be an interesting conversation.
Debbie, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Did one person bring that up? No, our teacher did. Oh, she did. He or she? Oh.
Yes, I can.
Wow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Karen?
Yes,
Which Karen?
we can hear you.
Hear us.
Can she hear us?
Two along the way.
Yes. I can hear.
She said she can.
Can.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, can hear.
That's good.
Good evening. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And I have asked Ms. Sierra Frank to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Please rise. Thank you, Sierra. All right, welcome again to our board meeting. We have a great crowd here, and thank you all for coming tonight. Going over some participation protocol. The purpose of board meetings is for the board to conduct its business in public, and during this meeting, the board will listen to but not respond to comments from visitors. Those wishing to comment must complete a comment card and give it to the board secretary before the meeting begins, or no later than agenda item 3.0 for presentations. No cards will be accepted once presentations have begun. Abuse of public comments personally directed towards staff members will not be tolerated. When it is your turn to address the board, please state your name at the start of your testimony. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and you will hear a timer when 3 minutes are up. Visitors who have completed a comment card indicating a desire to speak to an agenda item will be called at that portion of the agenda. And per board procedure, written materials to provide board members with background information should be submitted to the superintendent's office at least 1 week in advance of the meeting. All right, with that said, Dr. Watts, are there any changes to the agenda, please?
Thank you. President Vengadaslam, members of the board, Ms. Howley, community and friends, please note that a supplemental personnel report has been added to the consent agenda this evening.
All right. I'd like to ask a board member to make a motion, please.
I move that we add the supplemental personnel report to our agenda.
All right, is there a second?
Second?
All right, a motion has been made to approve the supplemental personnel report, and it has been seconded. Are there any discussions or questions? All right, hearing none, all those in favor say aye. And raise your right hand.
Aye.
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 And all those opposed say no, and raise your right hand. And the motion passes. Just a note, forgot to mention, Director Strauss is on video, or is it?
Just audio.
Not sure, just
We'll be able to
audio
see
right
raise
now.
your hand, but-
All right, okay. Now, we are going to do some recognitions, And before we get into the proclamation, I just want to read the following statement. The Kent School District is committed to the success of every student, family, and staff in each of its schools. Learning and work environments are enriched and improved by the contributions, perspectives, and the very presence of diverse participants. To that end, we are recognizing National Black History Month with the proclamation. While we will not single out any one person or group of people to represent their entire race or culture to receive this proclamation, we do believe that it is important to take these opportunities for celebration and recognition as we work to create a learning environment that is respectful, welcoming, and inclusive for every student, family, and staff, and in which their diversity is valued and contributes to their success. And I will call upon Ms. Denise Daniels to read the proclamation, please.
Whereas, when he founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, now the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, on September 9, 1915, Dr. Carter G. Woodson labored under the belief that historical truth would crush falsehood and usher in a new era of equality, opportunity, and racial democracy, and it has been its charge for over a century. And whereas in 1926, Dr. Woodson initiated the celebration of Negro History Week to bring attention to his mission to promote the study of Black history and help school systems coordinate their focus on the topic, and whereas in 1976, the celebration of Black History Month was decreed a national observance and expanded to include the entire month of February, and whereas today, Black History Month is supported and celebrated throughout the country by people of all ethnic and social backgrounds, and whereas whereas for more than a century, African American life, history, and culture have become major forces in the United States and the world, and whereas confident that their struggles mattered in human history, Black scholars, artists, athletes, and leaders self-consciously used their talents to change how the world viewed African Americans. And whereas in honor of this milestone, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History has selected Black Migrations as a 2019 Black History theme, which emphasizes the movement of the people of African descent to new destinations and social experiences. And whereas the Kent School District's commitment to equity and excellence for each and every student is grounded in the rich legacy, courage, and remarkable contributions of those who sacrificed to keep these dreams alive for generations to come and build a nation that is more just and more equal for all people. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Kent School District proclaims the month of February 2019 National Black History Month in the Kent School District and urges all citizens to join this observance.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise. All right, now we will call on Director Hardy to read the proclamation for the National Career and Technical Education Month.
Yes, whereas one of the Kent School District goals is to prepare all students to be college and career ready by raising the academic and social learning bar and closing the gaps to student achievement and college completion. And whereas Career and Technical Education, or CTE, is a great way to help and educate youth and adults with not only technical and academic skills, but life skills as well. And whereas research shows that in the 2014-15 school year, 87% of CTE high school students in the state of Washington graduated, and 100% of CTE post-secondary students in the state of Washington earned an industry-recognized certificate, credential, or degree. And whereas in the 2018 calendar year, Washington State, along with 41 other states and Washington, D.C., passed a total of 146 policy actions linked to CTE and career readiness, which illustrates the commitment from state leaders to advance CTE. Whereas the Kent School District understands the significance of CTE and offers CTE at Kent Meridian, Kent Lake, Kent Ridge, Kentwood, and Kent Phoenix Academy. The district also offers CTE classes at the middle school level, which enables students to earn high school credit. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the Kent School District Board of Directors proclaims February 2019 as National Career and Technical Education Month and urges all citizens to recognize the importance of CTE to prepare all students for success in career, college, and life.
All right, thank you. Do we have Miss Lori Paxton in the room? Okay, thank you.
if you like.
Thank you.
Oh,
President Vengadasala, members of the board, Dr. Watts, Ms. Holly. On behalf of over 100 career and technical education teachers, paraeducators, and staff, we'd like to thank you for this recognition, and especially thank you for your ongoing support of our career and technical education programs in Kent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we take a photo? Lori and everyone can take a photo. All right, we're about to begin our presentations, and we have 3 cards, so we won't be accepting cards after the presentations. So we are starting with our wonderful Institute for Community Leadership student presentation. We have students from all over the district from the Institute to present their legislative discussions and share their trip experience to the legislature in January of 2019. So shall I call Nyla? Who will be speaking? Nyla?
Number of us.
All right.
Yes, good.
All right, excellent.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, for the invitation to join you this evening. Thank you, board members, Superintendent Watts. We appreciate it. Members of the community, Chris Ferdoza, Rebecca, Kayla, Housai, and Student Services Director Sierra Frank will be sharing some words and reports with you from the Institute. I would also like to thank members of the Institute for Community Leadership students and parents who are here today. Could I ask you to stand up, please, to be acknowledged? Thank you very much for your service. Thank you. Executive Director Dr. Roy Wilson was not able to be with us today. He sends his regrets. We have a robust program throughout the state of California right now that, in conjunction with the California State Legislature, has been created statewide in 7 counties throughout the state, and he's currently carrying out an event in California. And to start us off, I'd like to ask Christopher Salgado to share a few words with you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Christopher Castro Salgado. I'm a freshman at Kenwood High School, and I would like to thank you, members of the board, on behalf of the Institute for the work you've done and giving us the opportunity to come here and speak. The Institute for Community Leadership is strongly dedicated to teaching a full understanding of the significance of Dr. Martin Luther King and the development of democracy in the United States. We learn about these topics through classes that are taken throughout the whole year and a great residential program that's called the Dr. King Life and Legacy classes, or as we call it, a boot camp. One that takes place from December 26th to January 1st. We host Life and Legacy classes either here in Oakland, or here in Kent, in Oakland, or sometimes in Dohola and the Quinault Indian Nation. Through Dr. King classes, students are able to develop and present their very own Dr. King, their very own speeches to present at Dr. King events, and that they carry out throughout the year. Thank you.
I am a former student of ICL when I was in middle school, and I'm currently our Educational Services Director. The Institute has received an appropriation to carry out nonviolence leadership work in Washington State public schools for 18 years, reaching hundreds, if not thousands, of our community's underrepresented, underserved, and disenfranchised youth. During this time, the Institute has been able to cultivate great working relationships with many leaders, including having legislators on our advisory council. As a result, we receive support from members of both parties as a nonpartisan organization. We play a leadership role on the Washington State Council on Public Legal Education. As such, we also work with the League of Women Voters, an organization dedicated to making a difference in our communities through voting. ICL creates civics curriculum for Washington State schools and is actively working to create educational policies to promote and enhance robust and equitable civics education. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Hosai Sahak. I am a sophomore at Kent Meridian High School. The Institute for Community Leadership has been very helpful for me in learning how to speak up for myself and find my voice. One of our focuses is studying and learning from Dr. King and how to be leaders like him. For the last 20 years, ICL has visited Washington State Legislature on Dr. King's Day. Here is what we do each year. We organize a student to attend. We divide up legislative offices for teams of 2 or 3 to meet with each. Each team has 12 to 14 meetings that we attend, and in most cases, we speak up with the chief of staff of the offices, and in some cases with the legislator themselves. We also meet with representatives on the floor. It is so important that young people like us can see a representative in the eye, shake their hand, smile, and say, here is what Dr. King meant to us. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam President and members of the board. My name is Ferdoza Isse, and I'm a junior at Kent Meridian High School. This past weekend, I and other students taught a civic class to 40 students in San Diego, California. We were invited to California by State Assembly member Dr. Shirley Weber, who is also the chair of the California State Assembly Black Caucus. Throughout the weekend, we met with the chair of the Latino Caucus, Lorena Gonzalez, as well as the staff for President Pro Tempore, Tony Atkins. The reason we were invited to San Diego and what connects Kent, Tacoma, Oakland, and San Diego are Dr. King classes and our advocacy for robust civic classes in all high schools throughout America. Thank you.
Our classes and activities are dedicated to develop our voices as leaders. We do this by becoming uncomfortable through the conduct of reading out loud and reading to the public. We also do coaching as another way of how to become our best, nobler selves. Inner change requires the capacity to be uncomfortable for a greater cause. Our classes are leadership based on sports models. We coach because we never stop learning. There is always something we can do to better ourselves. Furthermore, coaching is an act of love. It shows that someone sees more potential in you than you are currently displaying. In addition, these 3 months, we host leadership seminars. In leadership seminars, we meet with elders, cultural, and business leaders. elected officials, and others who are making a change in our community. This Saturday, we will be having the privilege to have a leadership seminar with Debbie Mattis, a nutrition services director at Kentwood High School, at our Odell Center next to Crestwood Elementary. Thank you.
The Institute has been selected by the Faith and Politics Institute, which is a nonprofit, not formally connected entity, or I shouldn't say entity, but a nonprofit that's connected to the United States Congress, to nominate young people to accompany congressional members, or in some cases represent congressional members when they themselves cannot attend faith and politics educational events and activities. This weekend, we have a young person, Fatima Chaudhry, who's a sophomore at Kentwood High School, representing the 9th Congressional District, and Congressman Adam Smith at the Congressional Civil Rights Pilgrimage. We've had young people participate in the Civil Rights Pilgrimage for the last 7 years, visiting historic civil rights sites in Montgomery, Selma, and Birmingham, Alabama. And it is an honor to have her represent us, and we look forward to hearing a report when she comes back. Thank you.
As Chris had mentioned earlier, the Institute carries out a 6-week traveling leadership academy. It is a transformative, educational, cultural, and social experience. We spend half of our days studying in class and the other half being civically involved. We sleep on gym floors and community centers. We also make our own food, and we clean it up. Our Do Your School Board, we ask that you nominate a student for this summer's Leadership Academy. Feel free to reach out to Dr. Rosen. Please consider nominating a student that you feel would want to develop a thirst for justice. Thank you. Is there any questions?
All right.
I don't have any questions, but I think you all just incredibly have presented yourself so well. Just congratulations.
Thank you.
I don't have a question. I am just, so I'm really excited to see all of you guys. Some of you guys I've seen at the schools, and I know, so I'm so excited that you guys are here. I've been smiling ever since I heard you were coming, so I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate your leadership and your willingness to step in front of us and share your learning, and I'm really excited to hear what you continue to do, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Debbie, any? Is Debbie? Oh, we lost her. Okay, all right. Yes, I just want to thank you so much for coming. I know we've been trying to get you here for a while now. And I also, I think all of us board members, we had an opportunity to watch the video, and I know Ferdosa, is it Ferdosa? Yeah, just the fact that you were encouraging our legislators and our elected officials talk about civic education and the importance of it. It really resonated, I think, with everyone who heard that message. And we want to thank you for being such a strong representative of our district in so many places, and not just legislature, but thank you for all the work you're doing for us. We are now up to 3.02, our November 2018. Oh, do we want to take a photo?
Yes.
Yes.
Take a photo with you guys.
Don't go yet.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm in no hurry, trust me.
It's a reminder that we need students here more often, right?
Need students here more
All right.
often, absolutely.
All right. So moving to our 3.02 November 2018 financial statement, Mr. Ben Rarick will present and be available to answer questions.
Good evening, board members. It's my pleasure to, hard act to follow. I'll do my best. It's my pleasure to present the November financial statement, which was to be presented to you at the board meeting that was snowed out. So this is a carryover from that. Before I get into the details of the report, which will be brief because I'm also presenting on the most up-to-date information we have as well, that we were close to being able to also include December as well, and think that we can post December early next week. As you know, we're in a transition. The person who actually did these reports has since taken an early retirement. We're in the process of trying to fill that position, and we are in a situation where we have been able to secure some part-time help that will help us bridge this gap, and hopefully we will be able to present December to you here very shortly at the next meeting, and then hopefully our goal is to have January back on schedule. But we continue to deal with the personnel issue as we present these statements. So for November, you have the full November financial statement in your packet, and then I've also created a couple of highlight slides that I think you have. The first looks at fund balance and refers to the data that you have on page 18 of your statement. And I think you'll see a common theme here. We saw it in October. You'll see it again in December, as well as that our monthly fund balances for each respective month are generally the highest that they have been in the last 4 years. That shouldn't necessarily be a surprise, but it's good news in the context of what we're looking at next year. And it also means, as I said last time, that I think we will be cash solvent for every month without the interfund loan this year, which is notable. Remember, when you're comparing these fund balances, you always want to compare same month. So October, November tend to be a little higher, but as long as you're comparing to November last year, November before, you've got an apples to apples comparison. And so the November fund balance was just a hair over $20 million. On to the next slide. Also, we include in the financial statements 4-year retrospectives on FTE. So these are the FTE that are hired and paid. This is not with regard to vacancies, okay? Again, I think you're going to see some trends that you would expect to see, which is number one, that certificated staffing is on a downward trend now for a third year, stretching back to November of 16. And so as of November of 2018, we had 1,796.8 certificated instructional staff FTE that were on the payroll, not budgeted, but on the payroll. And that's considerably less than it was same year-to-date last year, as you would expect, given the staffing changes we've made in our budget recovery process. You'll see a similar graph here for classified staff, and you see a different pattern, but you still see encouraging trends. So you see that there was an upward incline of staff from 15 to 16 to 17 in November, not what you saw with the certificated instructional, but a major drop in November, which again is what we would expect to see given the reorganization that we did last year, which was impactful to the classified staff units. And then, you know, I always try to pick out a couple of things in the larger voluminous statement that you might find of interest. Two things, one of which is highlighted on this sheet, another which is not. So on page 4 of your financial statement, one of the charts that we include is year-to-date certificated salaries, classified salaries, and employee benefits. And so what I've showed you here suggests that year to year, our staffing numbers continue to decline. Our staffing compensation is still up. So what you see is a netting against where the number of FTE is reduced, but as a result of the agreements that we've bargained as a district, it's more or less flat. And you'll see that represented on page 4 of your financial statement. That, of course, represents November, right? And then the other thing that is maybe a little bit more detailed, but is a good learning point as we talk about our 5% fund balance goal, is you'll see on this page the yellow highlighted $2.8 million number that, if you can read that, is commensurate with the row there that reads carryovers and others. And so it's just good to be cognizant of the various ways in which our fund balances are assigned or restricted for different purposes, and to remember that when we talk about our fund balance goal is tethered to the idea of unreserved and undesignated, right? So to the extent that we have categories of designations or reservations that are large, that's a fact that stretches our goal a little bit. In this case, it's carryovers. Just to give you an idea, this is 2.8 as of November of 2018. Last year, in November 2017, it was almost half of that, $1.4 million. Just reflects the fact that we have more carryovers from the prior year that have restrictions on them. I know a lot of this is, for example, LAP, okay, and the state giving us some flexibility in both in the amount that we carried over for LAP. But I would expect this number to come down as we move through the months this year. Okay, so that is going to complete my overview of the financial statement for November, and I'll be able to give you a similar profile in December. And unless there are any questions on that, it would be my pleasure to move into the budget status update, which reflects preliminary January data.
Yes, I was just about to say, one moment, Ken. Before we go into questions, Ken Smith had 3.02 November statement he'd like to speak to before we ask our questions.
Thank you very much, President on the board. Just a couple quick comments on the budget report. I think the budget status reports that the director is giving you is very helpful and points out the things. The only additional thing I would add on that slide he was at is that the $15 million of unreserved fund balance is not yet at the target 5% for this year. So this is the highest fund balance will be forever, the whole year, and it's not at the 5%. So, and that's in November. It was at that point. A couple reminders. The fund balance transfer of $3.2 million that has been talked about earlier. I just want to remind the board and the community that has not been approved by the board. And I have done some additional asking of experts. I have not yet found an expert that said you don't have to have a resolution. Every expert I've talked to said you have to have a resolution in order to make that there. So I think you're, and it's not audited. So it's unapproved and unaudited at this point in time. You can correct that by bringing the board resolution to say we approve the moving of the money from the tech levy into general fund. But it's just good accounting. You can't move money from one fund to the other without the board doing it. You didn't do it in your original budget, and you didn't do it in your fix. So I think you need to do that. And then these statements are not appropriate because they haven't been approved by the board. In terms of the February peach jar, there's the chart that was up there earlier. I think the board would be well served to ask for 3 different additional items on that fund balance. And I've done it on my own spreadsheet, but I think you're better off having your finance people do it. I can send them to your finance people. But look at 6 years of data, because I think you'll see different. And then look at August as well as October, and then do the breakdown, because I think you'll see you're making progress, and that's good. McCleary kind of helped bail out that, but to look through what's going on there. And then the final item is on your board policy 6002. The very bottom says, when you don't hit your 5%, the superintendent or designee shall create a plan to restore the 5% level. This plan shall be presented to the board within 60 days of the submission of the district's F-186. So on February 5th, that should have been presented to you. So the superintendent has a requirement or designee to give you a plan to restore the fund balance, and that has not been done. So you're currently out of compliance with 6002. Thank you.
All right, do we have questions before Ben goes into budget on financial statement?
No, financial
All
statements.
right, I do have a question, Ben. If we can go back to the staffing for SPED, you know, there were some under budget.
The staffing for?
SPED, special education. Page 6, I guess. We can get back if you're not sure about the questions. There are some under budgeted numbers in there that are there to build in capacity. And I'm just wondering how, I can ask this question when you speak about the budget, the IE budget, but I'm wondering how close we are to using that when we say it's built-in capacity. Do we, historically, have we used up all of those underutilized or under capacity numbers, budgeted numbers, by the end of the year?
Okay, so you're looking.
You can get back to me.
Okay,
It's on page 6 of the staffing, on the financial statement.
All right.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
So I'm trying to understand how it translates to the unencumbered budget for special ed, those numbers that you've given.
So are you asking why the district's current column is not closer to the budgeted column as it relates to special ed?
Wondering about the built-in capacity. Do we end up utilizing that by the end of the month? Does it go over or under what we've predicted? So
Okay.
we can talk about that.
All right. If it would be acceptable to the chair, I could take a look at that and get back to you?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. All right, so if it's okay with the board, I would move into the budget status update for, okay. So you should have these documents. This represents the January budget status update reflecting preliminary data. You're not going to see huge changes preliminary to final here. So a couple things about January. One of the significant pieces about January is it's when the apportionment reports start to catch up to our actual enrollment in the year. So the disbursements that the state makes starts to adjust for the enrollments that we've been sending them in the early months. So what happens is you get enrollment for September, October, November, based on what you originally estimated. January, it starts to true up. So for districts that have experienced an enrollment decline, as we have, you will see adjustments. And that's part of what you'll notice here. So this update follows the same structure that we have used with you typically. And first, let's start with revenues by source. Here we did make some adjustments. So now we have a January apportionment report that reflects the state's most updated and trued up statement of anticipated revenues based on the mix of enrollment that we in Kent are experiencing. A couple things happen that you will see reflected on the ultimate fund balance projection, which is slightly lower than the one you saw last time. Follow me here. So our property values in Kent appreciated far more than were anticipated, okay? That's a good thing, one would think, right? That affects our status as a LEA district. Remember, an LEA district is a district that is not rich in property and therefore receives a certain amount of aid from the state to equalize them, right? We knew we were right on the precipice of being a district that was either going to be in or out of that status. The value statement that we received from the county indicates that we're going to be out of that status almost entirely in the next calendar year. So an interesting thing happens there. We get more money in the sense that we are able to raise more on $1.50, but we receive less LEA or no LEA because of the depreciation. You would think that those things would just net out true. They actually don't within a school year. So we actually lose a little bit of money this year and gain a little bit of money next year as a result of this dynamic, which I hope I have explained. Not huge amounts of money, but what's most noteworthy is you've probably all as board members historically thought of yourself as an LEA district, a levy district. The way that that property has appreciated now, we may no longer be in that status, and that's still pending, but that's certainly a noteworthy development for the Kent Public Schools. Okay, expenditures by program. So by virtue of being through January, we are 41.67% of the way through the fiscal year. So any program that is considerably north of 41.67%, one of two things is happening. Either they're projected to overspend their budget, or their budget is uneven in the sense that there are some of these budgets, like for example, district-wide support shows up as high. The reason that's high is because there's large upfront costs associated with that budget. So it's not a linear representation throughout the year. Last time we looked at this slide, I think it was Director Hardy asked me about pupil transportation. I understand you had a conversation during the work session with Justin. We did dig into that a little bit. He is running high, and it's not a fluke of the month. His costs are higher, and that is a complex alchemy of bus routes, the cost of fuel, cost of homeless. It's not attributable necessarily to any one thing. But we're in conversations about tracking that as closely as we can and trying to bring that into budget. But that is one to keep an eye on as we move through the fiscal year. And again, it's not inefficiency. It's merely the driving costs of the pupil transportation program. But you will see, although there's some offsetting amounts throughout, with a couple of these being very slightly higher than 41%. In aggregate, we're well below that, and some programs are quite a bit well below that. Noteworthy being basic education, our largest program, at 40.2%. Okay, similar look. This is expenditures by object. You're using the same metric here, so we're 41.67% of the way through the year. We've spent 39% of our funding, so that's right around where we would expect and hope to be. The distribution is different, so on the 2,000, 3,000, and 4,000 series, we're pretty much right on budget, as you can see. Certificated is a little lower. That's our biggest object. Classified just slightly over. Health benefits just slightly under. But as an aggregate group, you're going to come in very, very close to 41.67%. And again, as we would expect, the 5, 7, 8, and 9,000 series are well below budgeted. That is by design. We expect them to come in below budgeted. And, the austerity measures that we've put in place, given what we're facing next fiscal year, in the non-salary environment, we expect those to come in under budgeted. The most difficult of those being the 7,000 series, because once you're in a contract, you're in a contract. So last year we were running light on contracted services and anticipated some savings, and that did not materialize, as it ended up more or less we were right at budget last year. Okay, on slide 6, year-to-date revenues. We did make some adjustments here in terms of what we project for the year. You will see those reflect on our final slide that shows projected fund balance. We're anticipating less LEA per our conversation. That shows up in state general. We're expecting a little more on the collection side, on the levy side. That shows up in local tax. Little less in state special, some of which has to do with caseload, and a little more in federal special. The net of all of these things, as you'll see, is a slightly lower projected fund balance, but not hugely lower. Year-to-date expenditures, you see again that with staffing being down, but the salaries we pay being up, the net of that is a small increase year to year in certificated, classified, and benefits, which is what I anticipated to see. And then, again, we've talked about this, I think, every time we've done a budget status update, but, under the smaller, the travel, the capital outlay, you're seeing huge increase numbers, and then you go back and you see it's way, way under budget. So you have to see those slides together. It just is a reflection of the fact we didn't spend any money on those objects last year, but they haven't even spent half of the budget in those categories. Okay, so you remember in November, we did an F200, an adjusted budget based on the contracts that we had negotiated as a district as well as our declining enrollment. So what you see on the far left there, that 130 figure, is we are at this point projecting an annual average enrollment that is 130 less than the F200 that we did, okay? Not to the original budget, but to the adjusted budget. So we're still well down in enrollment as compared to the original budget. It continues to be, a significant planning issue for us going into not only this fiscal year, but more so next. One thing that's probably notable is that it appears we finally caught up with Running Start. Every time we've budgeted for Running Start, the Running Start enrollments have exceeded that, and it was like a chase, no matter how high they were. That's an extremely popular program that seems to have leveled out relative to our budgeted projection. Okay, so here's a good graph to kind of illustrate what's happening in the world of enrollment. Right now we're the yellow, okay? So the orange, the gray, and the blue are the previous years, and you can see there's a kind of established arc of enrollment by month throughout a year. You typically peak in the fall and winter months, and then there's a gradual decline through the spring and summer. And that's not just true for the 4 I've shown here, but that seems to be a historical pattern, and it's not a Kent thing either. It seems to be just kind of endemic to school district enrollment. What's interesting here is the yellow looks a little different, right? So there's, if you can eyeball that, I don't know how well that shows up on your screen, but we start out much, much lower. And then I talked to you about this last month where you saw, a holding steady, if not an incline. For January and February, we're steady in months where you typically aren't, which means that the gap, the year-to-year gap, is still large but shrinking. So we're still way down in enrollment, but at least the curve is flattening a bit. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so among other things, this is some of the data you get on your financial report as well. So you're not going to get much new information here, but one of the things I'd note here is that, at the bottom right there, it indicates that right now we have 2816. So you see that there, and it's one slide, one column over and one row up. 2816.1 FTE all in on the payroll in the district as of January. And that's not the broken down, that's everybody, right? So just for context, in January of 2018, that number was 2914.6. And in January of 2017, that number was 2943. Okay? So declining staffing overall FTE. I think we'll probably not invest much time in this slide as much as we will next month, because next month we're going to come back to you and talk to you about the levy subfund. So I'm going to defer on this slide. You can have it for your reference, but this really is kind of the architecture of how we're thinking about doing the subfund, which is all the costs that the Kent School District incurs that are not funded through either state or federal dollars. Sorry. Okay, so here we are at the projected fund balance. So this is a slight adjustment on the revenue side. There's very little adjustment on the expenditure side. So I think the last time you saw this, we were in the low 17s. So there's about a $2 million delta here on the revenue side. Again, I'm hoping that orange curve that we saw in enrollment continues as we see it, in which case we might crawl back up a little bit. But for January, just January, the preliminary fund balance is projected at $20.4 million, which again suggests that we would be not necessarily in need of the interfund loan through the remainder of this fiscal year, not to say anything of next fiscal year. And then I think the next time we bring you this graph, we're going to start to do the current year in like a dashed or something. We got so many years up there, it's hard to, it's like a ball of yarn. But it is the bright red. And so given what I told you about the January fund balance, you can see coming up from January, the bright red right there at 20, okay? And a couple things to note, it's kind of an atypical arc here. It doesn't really follow the same shape as the other years. We would expect that. And also just eyeballing it, if you kind of trace with other months, you can see that historically March is our lowest month. Okay, so seeing where we're at in March is a good barometer, as that is almost always the southernmost point, if you will, of our fund balance journey throughout the year. That completes my presentation, and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Start from Ross.
Looked at one of the numbers, but what I'm going back to is expenditures by object, slide 5. It's where we show the percent of budget expended year to date.
Okay. Number 5, did you say?
Yes.
Okay.
And you mentioned between the 2, 3, and 4,000 series, one's a little bit higher, 2 are a little bit lower, but overall, we're probably right at that 41.67. But I want to understand is the trend is showing that we're going to maintain that, that the one who's a little bit over isn't going to take over? And so basically, are we on trend with our subtotal total salaries and benefits percent expended that we expect to?
I believe we are on trend in aggregate to spend almost exactly, or maybe a little less than exactly, what we budgeted for those lines. We do have some one-offs throughout the year that change the shape a little bit. In November, we have commitment stipends. There's cash outs. There's a couple of things that make certain months not regular.
Yeah.
But pretty much once you get through January, it's more regular. And we should have a pretty good, we could zone in pretty closely given prior year trends to know. So no, I don't expect that one will take over. I mean, that would mean that we would basically have to hire a bunch of classified staff to kind of just, to break the proportion of those staffing groups. So I think we're on track.
Okay, because to that end, what I also want to look at is slide 10, where we're looking at total FTE compared to budget, which is under budget,
Yes.
suggesting that we have positions to hire.
Yeah.
But
Good
assuming
question.
we can't necessarily hire all of them tomorrow, so do we have to keep that negative variance in FTE in order to keep our percent of budget?
The answer is yes. That's a good question. Part of what's going on, I think, is pretty significant reliance on agency staff. So we may have FTE that reflect, but we may be hiring somebody that doesn't reflect in that series.
Yeah.
So, but that's a good question, and it's actually a personal interest of mine. It's something I'm digging into right now in terms of the budgeted FTE number vis-a-vis these payrolls that we're getting. And that's something that I absolutely think should be a spotlight of our next adopted budget.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was all my questions.
My only question was, what are we doing? I know we skimmed over slide 11 on that staffing analysis.
Yeah.
Just how we're making a case in Olympia about that, the sub-fund, what are we doing as a district?
Sure. So just so we're clear, I'm not doing any lobbying in Olympia right now as part of my role. I am kind of staying in communication with a couple of key folks in terms of what the thinking is. I can tell you, as it relates to the sub-fund, choose my words carefully here. There is a shared concern, frustration, that the guidance that has been provided for the construction of the subfund leaves a lot of judgments to be made. And so concerns across districts about, are we all doing the same thing here? And is everybody interpreting this guidance the same? And essentially what OSPI has said to us is that to the extent that you have costs that are above and beyond what the prototypical school model funds, then you can put that in your levy fund. Well, that's a very sweeping, is Lisa here? Lisa and I have put a lot of hours into trying to construct this subfund in a way that we can systematize, report, and we keep calling other districts to see where they're at, and they're all waiting to see what we do. So there's a lot of consternation, I would say, about how this is going to work for districts. It is important for us because as we go out for our levy, it will be the basis for how we talk about the need for continued support of our public schools through local levies. But I think the kindest way to say it is the regulations are kind of in their nascent stage. Like everybody's still figuring this out. It's a new requirement. We're going to do it, and we're certainly going to make every good faith with it. But I expect there to be some variability among districts in how they handle it.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you.
We will now move to 3.04, our strategic plan goal 1 update using formative assessment results, iReady. And Ms. Talisa Reed, Director of Assessment, will present the formative assessment results.
Good afternoon to our guests, our board president, Dr. Watts and Ms. Howley. I am pleased to be here this afternoon to present our district's mid-year formative assessment review. I am the Director of Assessment, and I am situated very nicely where I am a part of organizational effectiveness, so goal 3, but I am the joint for everybody else, so I get to float around and do all kinds of interesting things. So I support all of our district's goals. In assessment, our role is to design, develop, deliver, maintain tools that educators in the organization can use to evaluate, measure, and document the academic readiness, learning progress, skill acquisition, and educational needs of our students in order to successfully prepare them for their futures. And tonight, we're just going to see where our students are, where they're exceeding expectations well, where they're on track, for their projected year's growth and which areas are in need of mid-year corrections. Our mid-year formative assessments are for growth. We are measuring growth, and so that teachers can have the data, not just teachers, principals, the district, to where we need to intervene as far as tutorials or enrichments for our students. For that, we use as a district iReady. We use iReady for math for our grades 3 through 8, and we use iReady, K through 2 also does iReady math, and then we use ELA is 3 through 8. Our high school does do iReady at the beginning of the year and the end of the year for lap purposes, lap identification, entrance, and exit out. For our math performance review, just how many kids that we have actually accessing this tool. In the fall, there was 16,633. In the winter, a little more, 17,625. And as a cohort, those without the movement, a solid cohort is 15,978. Students that are currently accessing the online instruction piece, iReady has multiple pieces to it, and as a district, we have schools, all of our schools use the progress monitoring and the benchmarking piece. The online instruction piece is used by 7 schools, and the data that I'll present later in the end of it, talking about those online instruction pieces, will include 6 schools because one just added the tool in January. So, to our graphs. What we're looking for here from fall to winter is less red, more green. And if you look at the data, that is our growth and how we measure where our students are doing well. And this is the entire district, no specific school independently. So if you notice, from fall to winter, we have that 17%. I'm particularly impressed with that kindergarten class. The data person in me wants to continue to watch that cohort to graduation because I really think that's the class to watch. If you see they entered in with no reds, they continue with no reds, but they've increased in their green. So that is their tier 1s. So they are actually moving up and progressing appropriately. And it's not a trend that we don't see across the board. We actually see it slow exactly where we should expect to see it slow down in the older grades because of the more challenging curriculum. As a district, this graph shows the typical growth. iReady is a product that we use to measure that growth, and every student is assigned grade level on a national norm what the typical amount of points they're supposed to grow in a year. They're expected to come here and learn something. So a typical student, let's say 7th grade ELA, should grow 4 points in a year. So the typical growth is how much in a year that student is supposed to grow. And then iReady also has a stretch growth, which is an ambitious goal. But what the stretch growth goal actually measures for us is students, when they are actually a little behind, it takes a little more to get them back on par with their grade level peers. And so it's not an impossible goal to achieve, but it's just that stretch. So those that made that typical growth plus their stretch. What this slide is actually showing is that as a district, to highlight, we have 45% of our students who have met at least 40% of growth towards their typical growth goal. But I want you to pay particular attention to, we have 24% of our students who have already met their growth goal at 100%. The stretch growth goal. This one, 44% of our students are already at 40% towards their growth goal. And if you look at that 6% who've already met their stretch goal, so that means that 6% of students have already met their this year's growth goal plus some. Right here, this is a typical growth by placement where it has the different tiers, and at the top where you will see the mid-on grade or above grade level, those that are early on grade, 1 grade level below, 2 grades below, and 3+ grades below. We know that as a district in education period, right now we are aggressively attacking closing that achievement gap. So I included this slide so that you can see, and so I'm going to draw your attention to those that are 3+ grades below and look at that growth, and I highlighted it in green. What we're expecting to see and what is typical normed for iReady across the nation is that should be at this point in the middle of the year 50%. So we expect to see at least 50%. And if you look at our students that are 2+ grade levels below, you're seeing high percentages. You're seeing 80%, 67, 75, 75. That 6th grade is really smashing the game at 93%, 62%, 83%. What that represents is that we are aggressively attacking closing the achievement gap and bringing those students that are more than 1 grade level behind up to standard, and that is what we want to see. Our online instruction is used to supplement and not supplant our regular core instruction, and iReady, when they access it, their best practice is that students are 30 minutes a week on the online lesson. So what you're seeing is when students are participating in the online lessons and are passing those lessons at 70% or higher, what their percentage is, and what we see is 61% of the typical growth has been met when students have access to those online lessons and they are on them and passing them at 70% or higher for 30 minutes or more a week. Our reading performance, we have 13,829 for the fall. In the winter, we had 13,888, and for our fall and winter comparison, that cohort is 12,672. And those that are accessing those online instruction is 2,060 students. Again, here we're looking for our growth. We're looking for less red, more green. And you will see the trend is continued district-wide, where we are seeing massive decreases in the red and massive increases in the greens. So if you're looking at kindergarten from 5% to 23, when you're looking at 2nd grade 17 to 32, our students are definitely growing, and we give all the credit to our principals and our teachers. We have instructional coaches, our ESSA coaches, our IE staff. They're really putting in the work to help our students close those gaps and meet their goals. As a district, 52% of our students are at 60% of their, have met 60% of their typical growth, and paying particular attention to those that have completely met their typical growth for the year. That's 39% of our students have already grown a year's worth, and I'd like to say that was by December, because our midwinter point was 11 weeks after the start of the school year, put us in the first 2 weeks of December. And we are approaching our 3rd window in March. Again, that stretch growth goal, 45% of our students have achieved 40% of their stretch goal points, and 14% have already met their stretch goal, meaning that they have met a year plus some. Again, when we go back to, this is what I like to call my closing the achievement gap slide. If we go back to looking at our students that are 2 or more grade levels, we're seeing a lot of more than 50%, which is typical norm. They should be at 50% or higher. So we're seeing that growth and closing that gap for that group of students is what we want to see there. Again, here's our iReady online instruction. Again, that's 6 schools. We have 7, but 1 did not meet this timeline, so it's not included here. 73% of typical growth when the students have access to lesson online instructions for 30 minutes or more and pass those lessons with a high pass rate of 70% or higher. 61% again is that number that have met their typical growth. There's another component to iReady that we use for progress monitoring, and it's called Standards Mastery. Standards Mastery is standard specific. They're assigned by teacher, so the teacher can assess a specific standard, and it's 5 to 6 questions, a really quick 15-minute or less snapshot, and they are provided with the reports Another interesting thing about standards mastery is that it uses the language of smarter balance. So it exposes students to the language, so language is not a barrier. It also exposes students to the tools and those drag and drop things that they have to do to be able to answer, choosing multiple answers for a question. So it provides valuable information to the students so that the teacher so that she can cater instruction to the students. And it also provides students with that valuable just that, how do I take the test? We also have a professional development plan. We have the formative assessment PD sessions that have occurred with leaders, coaches, working with teachers, one-to-one with principals on how to utilize and capitalize on the value of this tool. Curriculum Associates is our vendor that we use. They offer every building 6 hours of iReady professional development and 2 hours additional for the standards mastery. We have schools that are further along in the implementation and the use of iReady, so those schools are actually able to allow other schools to utilize some of their hours, so we don't lose them, and we've also been able to roll them over from year to year. It's proven to be very valuable to our buildings. One-to-ones with the Director of Assessment, myself, I have had the opportunity and continue, even though February just messed up my schedule a whole lot, to meet one-to-one with teacher teams, the principals, APs, the coaches, whoever they put in front of me to get the message of how we utilize this, how do we not only pull these reports, but how do we align them to what is going on in the classroom and use it to inform instruction and build in practice. There will be an April progress update given to KSD leadership on where we are standing after our third window in March. And then we will start doing some 1920 planning on where buildings are and their use of iReady and then what do they need and expect so that I can communicate and develop a plan for them that's specific for what they need. Now is an opportunity for questions.
Yes, thank you. So my first question is, what level are the 6 schools that are using the weekly iReady?
The online instruction piece, they're all elementary.
They're all elementary
yes,
schools? Okay. And then I also noticed a significant kind of drop in middle school. So I noticed that, so I'm wondering, what, is there attention being paid to that, or what is how are we moving forward to address that? Because there was a significant drop, actually, when you look at
that significant drop from that middle school, it could be attributed to a number of factors. We also see sometimes, I can remember someone on the board drawing out during our discipline where there's an increase in discipline. So just to be able to pinpoint that specifically, it'd be very difficult. We have our ideas of what it might be, but what we're actually doing in the middle school is going into the middle schools. I know next week I will meet with Meeker and Principal Nash to develop a plan for her English teachers on how they utilize the tool and get the most benefit out of it to specifically address the needs of their students. So a lot of it is actually going out and getting into the buildings and showing people exactly what it's capable of doing for them, addressing that. And then we can't forget that iReady is a snapshot in time, just like any other piece of data, just like Smarter Balance. And as a district, we operate with MTSS, our multi-tiered systems of support. So when we're looking at our data and talking about particular students, we don't want to ignore the fact that there are lots of things that could impact instruction. So we're not just looking at iReady or Smarter Balance. We are making sure that we're paying particular attention to the social emotional things that a kid may be experiencing. We're paying attention to attendance. We're paying attention to discipline, because all intervention sometimes does not necessarily need to be academic. Sometimes we need to provide the students with other skills so that then we can remove that barrier so they can access instruction.
And so is there a thought about doing the weekly practice at the middle school level? Is that one of the options?
Yes. A couple of our middle schools are already doing the progress monitoring piece. They're actually using them already and getting the data back from them. So they're actually assigning the quizzes for the students according to the standards. And then they're pulling it back, and I'm getting great feedback on it. Just what they're able to do in their PLCs, and they're actually meeting and discussing, and people are collaborating about what they're doing to help their students meet a standard, what I can try. But going into these buildings, sitting down and actually spending time providing them with some professional development and that one-on-one assistance that sometimes we need. And then how do I even read the data? Data is a skill set that it's grown. So expecting that our teachers just automatically know exactly what to do when they get it, and removing that fear around it, as opposed to building the literacy and how they can best use it to serve our students, is what our mission has been for the year.
And then my last question is, you mentioned kind of closing the gap, but I'm wondering about the gap so it's not broken down by demographics, so I'm not sure how.
No,
you
I can get you
mentioned that. So is
demographic. I can get you demographics on that. I thought I prepared this for a work session, and so I had to cut a whole lot out. So just invite me back. Gladly have that conversation, because I do have demographics.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm having some trouble looking at these typical growth by placement, where you've got the mid on grade or early on grade, 1 grade below, 2 grades below. So if you're looking at like 3+ grades below, and I'm looking at the mathematics one, and it says that in 3rd grade, the percent was 80% improved. What does that mean, 80%?
That 80%. So when we're looking at our students in the 3rd grade, those that were already three or more grade levels behind, that 80% of their typical growth goal, so they've already met that goal. So we're looking at 175 students. If their typical growth was 30 points, they've already grown within that year. And so when we're thinking, they still have from December until the end of the year for instruction, they've already grown for the year. They're only going to continue.
Grades below at this point in time.
And so they have caught up. And so we're expecting that, my expectation is that they will continue to grow aggressively. And so by the end of the year, they may be 2 grades below, or maybe 1 grade below. And if we think more, especially towards our older students, and how the larger the gap, the harder it is for them to access that more challenging curriculum, that speaks volumes. Because when I'm in 8th grade, now I know it. I can understand what's being written, what's in the book, or I can understand what's being instructed on.
Right. I'm concerned about the middle school years too. There's not a whole lot of growth there, and I think you're sort of addressing it, and you've said multiple variables I understand about middle school age.
But in some cases, it's like 50%.
If we look at, let's go to 7th and 8th grade on slide 10 for math. If we looking across and what the typical amount of points that a student is expected to grow, we see that there's a decline in how many points that is. Because of the challenging curriculum, and it's harder to get points at that level.
Already, it makes it even all that more difficult.
Exactly. Exactly. So when we look at the ELA typical growth chart that's like that, it's saying that 7th and 8th grade, they're only expected 4 points because of the rigor of our literacy curriculum at that age group. They're having to do a whole lot more than what would have been expected at the younger levels. So they've already accomplished, hopefully, those high frequency words and the phonics and the phonological awareness. So now they are really digging down into that comprehension and being able to apply what I learn and analyze it. And so you see that the amount of points that they're supposed to get in a year is actually a lot smaller, but it's a lot harder because of the challenging curriculum that they're actually, what is expected of them to do and how they're expected to perform.
And I can see, when you're talking about the stretch goals, I can see where PLCs are going to be absolutely critical to working with those things to bring the kids farther than 1 year's worth of growth. The standards mastery tests, that you said maybe take 15 minutes, can those be administered anytime during the year, or is it particularly at the times when we do?
They can be administered anytime. So if we were all teachers, we all have access to our class, and we can go in, and if I'm doing a standard on numbers and operations, whatever that standard is, I can go right in and click that particular standard and assign it out to all of my students, and it's 5-6 quick questions. Actually have some teachers using it to do as common assessments, so they're coming together and they're clicking multiple standards. Of course, it makes it longer, but it gives them a standardized way to look at what's going on within that grade level and looking at them as a group. But it's a wonderful tool, I must say. I am very impressed with Standards Mastery and the information that it's able to give, and it also gives the reports and demographics so that they're able to see, teachers can see their students and who is exactly struggling with that particular standard, so that when they're doing, do I reteach the entire group, or do I offer tutorials and intervention for those that are struggling with this particular standard, or do I offer enrichment for those that you have it and I need to keep pushing you forward on another thing or progressing at another level in that same content area.
Again, I see that's where PLCs would be just incredibly critical and useful. All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Well, I'm looking at this and trying to interpret the data right. I'm looking at math diagnostic results, fall and winter comparison, and you're showing the growth that you've talked about, reduction in the tier 3, growth in the tier 1. But should I be concerned about how basically every year, starting in 3rd grade, starts out worse or where they kind of met next year? So regardless of where they end at the current year, the growth they made in the current year, we're back to minimum 25% in tier 3, under 20%, and so they're achieving growth, but they're not maintaining it for the next level. Is that the right way to interpret it, first of all? And second, we'll start with there.
I don't think so, because when you start looking at the standards, they're different. So remember, we're assessing on different standards. The cohort may not be the same. The students may have moved and shifted. Some are still here and some are still not. And we have to consider regression over the summer. That's a big thing. There's regression over winter break, and we know statistically the data shows that when kids regress 1 month, it takes 2 months to bring that gap back up. So when we're starting to consider those things and how kids are losing and gaining and moving, I think it's important that it's not wrong if that's to look at it, because that is one way to look at it. But I think the focus should probably be on the fact that that same grade level, even if they came in with the regression that they faced and all of the other data points that pertain to a particular student, that there was growth. So we really want to see that they're growing. My concern is more when I don't see any growth at a large scale, because then that is a real what's happening here moment that we need to really clue into.
And isn't it that even if they master 2nd grade standards, or are the end of the year standards, when they come in the fall, they're looking at end of the year 3rd grade standards, so that they're going to have to
move up.
So it's not the same standard going across from the June to
1 year to year
to September.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And then so it's trying to basically read the math and the reading at the same time.
Okay.
And it looks like starting 5th grade and beyond, there are more % of test takers in tier 3 in reading than in math. So how do we, and then how do we assess, putting the resources in the right place to say, okay, 6th grade reading had 41% in the fall, 34%, this is tier 3. So that growth is there, but there's still 34%, where math is something less, 18%. And so do we prioritize resources to focus on one versus the other if there are more kids in tier 3?
That's actually one of the questions that I write down. If you come to my office and see my board, it's crazy. Anything that I think, I put it there, and that is one of the things that I said. We're putting a lot of focus and emphasis, I think, across the state, because statewide our math smarter balance scores are not great. So we are now starting to put more focus on math, but that's where that balancing game comes in. How do we find that healthy balance in between where we put our focus at? And we have to look at our data to tell us. And so that's a mid-year correction for us to go back and say, okay, so whatever we're doing for math, we need to keep it up, but we need to not drop the ball or not ignore and put some resources in ELA as well, if that makes sense. But it is one of those things that I ask, and I do ask lots of questions when I see data. Every time I see it, I see something different, and I wonder, and I don't keep them to myself. I actually work very closely with a lot of our communities, teaching and learning, so I will go and say, hey, look at this. What do you think? What about this? And we are really good. We have a great team that we are asking the right questions, that have the right skill and the will to provide the buildings with what they need.
Thank you.
Not a problem.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the standards mastery, and I know some of the tools the tool you were demonstrating there. I couldn't help wonder, given something that came to my attention recently about play-based learning and how that would look like if there were some inquiry-based approaches in the classroom versus doing that particular test. Actually going out and planting flowers and doing that computation. So I guess I'm questioning, have you seen in your observations, are there classrooms that are doing some innovative things beyond doing that particular type of testing, or is that an imposed thing?
I think standards mastery is just one form of formative assessment. Are they doing wonderful things in the building? Yes, ma'am. I've been in quite a few of the buildings, and I like to walk around and just randomly look inside the room so that I can see what it looks like, because anything in the moment is a formative assessment. You're giving me a formative assessment right now. And so it's important that our teachers understand not only what formative assessment is, but that everything is data, and how they actually use that and gather it, so that when students actually sit down, because yes, we do all of those things to enhance the learning and to make sure that they've acquired the skills, but ultimately at the end of the year, they still have to sit down and being able, there's value to sitting down for a few minutes, and it builds stamina as well for testing with the things that they're doing. Standards Mastery is a wonderful tool, and our teachers are doing all kinds of things, plus that differentiation that happens inside of instruction to meet the needs of students where they are, to build them up and bridge those gaps in learning. I think we are sitting pretty well
So
in
we're
Kent right now.
capturing those different
We
methods.
are trying to capture them. I wish we could bottle some, because if you pay attention to that 6th grade on that scale for the measure, when we talk about the typical growth with that 6th grade team, I need to see them. Actually going to go out to some buildings next week. I want to see what's being done in those 6th grade rooms, because it looks really good. Strong set of teachers, I can only assume instruction is strong, and the formative assessment and their ability to use that data to meet the needs has got to be strong. So then if we can take that and use it to work with other teachers, then we can kind of level it out in the system and spread good practice.
All right. Any other questions? Comments? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Teresa.
All right. We are up to our Board of Directors discussion and approval, 4.01, our right of first offer to the City of Covington. And I'd like to ask a board member to make a motion, please, to approve right of first offer.
Okay. I move that we approve the right of first offer with the City of Covington for the existing Covington Elementary School, the old Covington Elementary School.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. A motion has been made to approve the right of first offer, City of Covington, for old Covington Elementary School. Are there any discussions or questions?
Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead. Same question. Yeah, it was brought up at our joint meeting with the city of Covington that we were in progress for this and whatnot, and I'm wondering where we are with this. I mean, if we're doing the right of first refusal, does that mean that we're putting it up for sale ASAP?
Right of first offer.
Offer, sorry. Right of first offer, sorry.
That's a great question, and I was at that same meeting, so thank you for asking that. I asked the same question. So yes, Reagan and with Dr. Watts and I, we would like to extend them the right of first offer. As you know, they want to put their epicenter, their city center there. I do want to mention that it was very interesting to hear the city council know that when they're planning a city center for Covington, it's amazing that they're already out in our high schools asking our students what they want it to look like. And I heard multicultural, place to hang out. So how would we not do that?
Yeah.
So the right of first offer, what it is gives them the right. We are going to sell it. We have a 17-acre parcel there. We have split it up into 2 parcels. So they want about the 8-acre parcel that's in the front. We will continue to own the 7-acre parcel in the back for future development or anything that we need. And that's where they want to put their city center.
So it's just, there aren't any buildings on that back portion. It's where
There is not.
The playground or whatever was.
That's where the field and the rest of the vegetation is.
Okay.
So my question is, it looks like this agreement extends through December 2020.
It does, and we will not get to that point.
Okay, that was going to be my question. So have there been so, I mean, what happens if there's other offers that come before that?
It won't. So the process is now you go to the right of first offer, and then what we'll do is we'll put it up for sale, and then they want to purchase it, but there are there's another entity that we need to do, another board approval that we need to do just to sell the property.
Right.
So that'll be the second thing that I will come to you with. I would say in 2 months or less.
Okay.
All right. Any more questions? Hearing none. I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no and raise your right hand. All right, motion passes. 4.02, inclusive education on-site stabilization and intervention contracts. I'd like to ask a board member to make a motion, please, to approve 4.02.
I'd like to move to approve the agency contract for MindSource for $26,700 for the 2018-19 school year.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, a motion has been made to approve 4.02 inclusive education on-site stabilization intervention contracts. Are there any discussions or questions?
Questions about the standard questions. Have we used this vendor before? What specifically mentioned on-site? What sites do we know that they will be at or have committed them to?
Sure. So this contract is for one individual student at the top program. And so it was just for a RBT or CBT. It's a behavior technician to be one-on-one with a child to help them. Well, I should say not child. They're 18 to 21 there at top. So with that particular student, and they are now aging out. And so this particular contract will be ending. This is the final.
Okay.
The final one, yes. And we have used them before.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you.
No questions. All right, to call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, say no and raise your right hand. Motion passes. All right, 4.03, digital learning grant request of Kent Schools Foundation. I'd like to ask a board member to make a motion, please, to move 4.03.
I'd like to make the motion to grant the request of the Kent School Foundation made by Digital Learning Technology in the amount of $6,000 to fund the Makerspace Concept STEM program, which will be piloted in the middle schools.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, a motion has been made and seconded to approve 4.03, digital learning grant request of Kent Schools Foundation. Are there any discussions or questions?
I do have a question.
Director Daniels, go.
So I'm just wondering what this is doing. It seems like a small amount. So can you kind of give us a little bit of information about what it's for?
So what we're intending to do is create some STEM STEAM makerspaces that across all 6 of our middle schools. I'm starting with middle schools. And considering the makerspace concept is part of what we're trying to accomplish, you can do a lot in a makerspace with a small investment, at least to get the process started. So this is also to engage middle school students in some areas that we felt or have been given some feedback that there's a very specific need.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you for actually focusing on this. I think for the last 4 years, I can remember we've talked about this. We've had one-on-one discussions, never anything about makerspace and our other school districts are moving forward. So thank you for getting involved and getting this enrichment grant. All right, so I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
All those opposed say no and raise your right hand. All right, motion passes. 4.04 are Kent Schools Foundation Classroom Enrichment Grant Funds. I'd like to ask a board member to make a motion to move 4.04, please.
I move to accept the grant funding from the Kent Schools Foundation for enrichment.
All right, is there a second?
I will second.
All right. So a motion has been made and seconded to approve the Kent Schools Foundation Classroom Enrichment Grant Funds. And are there any discussions or questions?
I'd just like to say that when reading through the possibilities, it's gone to really small, but I really like the variety of things that are going to be spread out at all of our different schools, art supplies and volleyballs and things like that. I think it's really great. So thank you, Kent School Foundation.
Yes, I agree. I thank our schools foundation for really putting focus on the arts, and all of our educators also participating, and our volunteers also participating in this and awarding the grants. So at this point, I'd like to ask for a vote. All those in favor say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
All those opposed say no and raise your right hand. All right, motion passes. 4.05, WEMS grant for Crestwood Safety Patrol. I'd like to ask for a board member to make a motion, please, to approve. 4.05.
I'd like to move that we accept the request to submit the WEMS grant application for Crestwood Elementary School for their safety program.
All right, is there a second?
I will second.
All right, a motion has been made and seconded to approve WEMS grant for Crestwood Safety Patrol. Are there any questions or discussions? Hearing none, we'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Raise your right hand. All right. 4.06, change order approvals, Grass Lake Elementary Multipurpose Room, Transportation Center parking lot expansion, and Covington Elementary replacement. I'd like to ask a board member to make a motion, please, to approve 4.06.
Move to approve the change order approvals for Grass Lake Elementary multi-purpose room, the Transportation Center parking lot expansion, and Covington Elementary replacement.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded to approve change order approvals for Grass Lake Elementary multipurpose room, Transportation Center parking lot expansion, and Covington Elementary replacement. Are there any questions or discussions? I have one.
I have some questions. I guess they're related in general to both the Grass Lake and the transportation. They both mentioned that after it was approved, there were things that were required, not by us, Water District, City of Kent. So it really kind of leads me to what, do we think that something came up afterwards that they didn't know about before? or that there's some other initiative of why this came up after the bid was approved, and not necessarily in the original specs?
That's a
If
great
you know.
question. Every agency that comes out to our sites and gives us an inspection and says, hey, I know you have a set of approved plans here, Dave, but we can't build it like that. So particularly with Grass Lake, after the bid, the Covington Water District came up, and that was a critical, you got to put a fire hydrant loop all the way around the back of your building, not up at the beginning of the job. So that was the critical portion of that. With transportation, the planned reviewer reviewed all of the plans. So just so that I'm going to give you some detail here. Anytime we do a project anywhere on our school district, and I'm going to make the point of case of this admin building. Let's go to transportation. I'll come back to the admin building. So in transportation, we improved a parking lot. We had to come all the way out to 104th and all the way out to King Kangley and improve every single bit of ADA ramp on city property to their standards that we don't own. So this is something that I'm taking very seriously on every project that we do now. Looking at that, was this built into a contingency? Absolutely. Or was it built into the project number? No, it was not. Is it something that has to come out of contingency? Of course. So what we need to do is be more diligent that when we go out for projects is that we get the best assessment from the agency that we're working. Pre-application meetings, getting into the civil places, these are all things that I'm doing in front now to make sure that we don't have these items.
Yeah, my question was about that contingency fund. If I know you're keeping track, but it would be, I think I've asked this before, to kind of see where we're at, before it comes to the board.
Absolutely.
For approval, so we know where we're at least. And I know we've talked about putting it on the website, I think, on our premises.
I think we have a work session set up for April 17th, so we can do that.
Okay, sounds good. All right.
And the other thing, on the Grass Lake and the transportation lot, we went over the undistributed funds.
We did, unfortunately.
Don't usually see that.
We don't.
But that's probably the ramps and things.
We don't normally see that. I can tell you that the point of the transportation, a portion of it was actually the sidewalks. We're critical for space down in the bus garage. So we've been looking for space. We did find a space that we actually improved. Other than the project, we gained about 35 spaces with a small change order to this. That was inclusive of this.
That's big.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
So at this point, I would like to call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye and raise your right hand. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no and raise your right hand. Motion passes. Didn't look. Motion passes. All right, 5.0, consent agenda. Let's see. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from our consent agenda?
5.09 for me.
Okay. All right. I'd like to ask a board member to make a motion minus 5.09. Oh, approve a motion minus 5.09.
Make a motion?
Yeah. Make a motion, yes, thank you.
I'd like to move that we accept the consent agenda minus 5.09.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. A motion has been approved and seconded to approve 5.0 consent agenda minus 5.09. All right. 5.09, Karen, please.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to vote that one first.
Oh, all right. Sorry. I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor of 5.0 consent agenda minus 5.09, say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. All right, motion passes. 5.09. Karen?
Yeah, on the capital projects voucher, I was reading through the things there, and there are things about the old Panther Lake School, removing a portable soils test and architect, things like that. And I don't feel like I know enough about what's going on with Old Panther Lake. And maybe I've missed something, but I wasn't aware that we were going ahead with stuff.
At this point right now, we are in process of having the hazmat. That survey's been done on the building, and we are in for preliminary design or preliminary application to have it demolished. That's what we're doing at this point.
Okay. So there was something about architect there too. I can't remember what architect.
We have to have a well, and we have to have seismic items put in, a ground well to see what kind of water it is. This would be for future progress on the site.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're apprised of how we're progressing there, what's going on.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, I think one of the considerations is that we were supposed to have a capital facilities work session in February.
Yeah, the last month
And
of
postpone
February.
and postpone, yeah.
Okay.
So we're eagerly awaiting April.
Well, you didn't make it snow.
All right.
I don't think.
Okay, so I'd like to call for a vote to approve 5.
I need to make a motion.
Oh, make a motion.
Yeah. Or somebody needs to make a
Messing
motion.
up here.
I'd like to
Please
move to approve 5.09.
All right, is there a second? Okay, thank you. Any more discussions, questions? Hearing none. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And raise your hand, right hand.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. All right, motion passes. Getting tired. 6.0, informational 6.01, procedure 1250P, students on governing boards. Any questions or discussions? As a reminder, board does not take a vote on informational items.
Just the, and there's a little bit of confusion, I think, on my part, maybe on other people's part too. It says 2 students, a junior and a senior, shall be selected from the Student Leadership Advisory to serve as student representatives on the board. Does that mean that there are going to be 2 students sitting at the same time so that we have, or is it just 1 student for the first semester and 1 student the second semester?
Correct. So the procedures show 1 student first semester, 1 student second semester. And with the changes we discussed in the work session, I believe that we will have a greater applicant pool going into next year. And with the changes with that policy that we'll have at the next meeting, we can start recruitment early before the end of the school year for the first semester of next school year.
Good.
So that's our hope.
I have a question about some language. I'm looking at under the removal part where it talks about the board may remove student representatives for failure to fulfill the duties, et cetera, or for behaviors that the board deems unacceptable as a member of the board of directors or embarrassing to the school district.
Yes.
Is that same language in expectations for board members as well? Or I'm just wondering why, I mean, that just seems kind of interesting to me.
So this language, all of this language was written by our Student Leadership Advisory. This language was written by our students.
Okay.
This language was put in there by them, as was the process with the interview process that they've gone through. Okay. So they felt strongly about having that put in there, and that was the language that they wanted in there and they wanted the removal process as part of the procedure and have it be clear about how it would happen, so.
Okay. Is there
as far as what it is with the board,
Well, I'm wondering, is there then a place, because I'm just, what I don't want to do is hold students to higher standards than we hold adults. So I'm just wondering, is there a
Yeah.
space to say, right? I'm sorry, but is there a space to maybe say this was, just so it's clear? Because if somebody looking at this, and actually it was a student that brought it to our attention, to my attention, to the attention of someone. So I'm wondering, is there a space to say, as written by students of, the advisory, so
We
whatever
could
that looks
clarify that
like.
on the procedure. That's
So, okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I had the same question. So thank you for addressing that. All right, we are down to 7.0, our communication from the audience. And we have 2 cards. Miss Willena Adams and Linda Buchanan. And please.
What did you say was first?
Don't want to mispronounce. Miss Adams? Willena Adams, thank you.
Get over here. My name is Willena Adams. I reside in Puyallup, Washington. All children need the support of school staff that includes children with autism. I'm standing and speaking in support of Jamar that was locked out of Springbrook Elementary School by the principal and staff on December 14, 2018. You all had enough proof with the security footage as evidence to fire the principal immediately, but you didn't. You must fire the principal and the staff that actively assisted the principal in keeping Jamar locked out of the school. The principal should not be on paid leave for this horrific thing she has done to this child. She should be fired immediately. We are standing demanding justice for Jamar and his family. While watching your board meeting online on January 23, 2019, I was appalled when I heard the board member, your legislative representative, share his empathy to the staff at Springbrook Elementary School directly from his board seat about what he called the crisis at Springbrook Elementary School. But not once was any public empathy shown or spoken of for the student. When the child's grandmother came and spoke from her heart to this board, there was no public empathy shown to her by the board. It's my understanding from the date of the incident, the KSD superintendent has never reached out to the family, and that's not acceptable. Where's your public show of empathy for the student? Did you ever think what the student was feeling when he was locked out in the cold by the principal and staff, or how afraid he was when he was not allowed to even enter the building to call his mother? This is what this amazing child that happens to be autistic had to endure at the hands of your staff, which is a direct reflection of this board because action reflects leadership. So when you, the legislative representative, meet with the Springbrook staff over that cup of coffee you mentioned in your testimony to them, you tell them that the Kent School District owe the student and his family an apology. We stand in support for Jamar. We expect nothing less than full justice. The Kent School District must apologize and pay. KSD Board of Directors and Superintendent, you can publicly apologize tonight. There's no better time like the present. Thank you. I stand for Jamar.
Thank you. Ms. Buchanan, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Linda Buchanan, a teacher at Springbrook. Thank you for taking your time to listen. I would like to inform you about Ashley Short, the principal of Springbrook's impact on myself and Springbrook Elementary. First, her impact on me. She took me from an underperforming teacher with no direction to a proficient teacher leaning towards distinguished, who feels excited to learn and try new things to improve student learning. Before Principal Short came to Springbrook, we were in the bottom 5% of schools in the state. According to our current ESSA data, we are not a targeted school in any subgroup. This is a big deal. There are 9 subgroups. The vast majority of schools have at least one targeted area. We scored it in the 10th decile in ELA growth, which is the highest score a school can receive. Our math growth score was in the 8th decile. Amazing growth in both subject areas. Last year, 40% of our students scored higher than the average growth rate. This growth could not have been possible without Principal Short's effective leadership, since this data measures the last 3 years, Principal Short's first 3 years of leading. She has come up with innovative ways to support teacher learning. Cell 5D has even written 2 articles to highlight her methods. Principal Short offers professional development to all her teachers to improve student learning. Before Principal Short, the only professional development Springbrook had was a yearly book study. If you've participated in one of those, you know how effective book studies are not. Some other Kent school districts offer the same low-level professional development. Some teachers only get professional development if they make time for it or pay for it themselves, or pay for it. Teachers at Springbrook receive the following professional development opportunities: job-embedded PD, math studios with partners from the University of Washington, individual coaching, grade level coaching cycles, instructional rounds, learning cycles. As Principal Short says, learning is a set of sophisticated learned skills. Teaching is a set of sophisticated learned skills. Good teaching doesn't just happen. It takes time, purposeful action, a plan, and someone to lead those. Principal Short has taken these necessary actions, as you can see from this data and the facts. I'm afraid without Principal Short as principal of Springbrook, all these plans and actions will be lost. Thank you for your time.
We will now move into our legislative update with Director Hardy, please.
Given that we didn't meet a couple weeks ago, but the legislators did, we've got a lot of catching up to do. I'll add on, so as of last week, 42 days, 7 weeks into the 105-day legislative session, so not quite halfway, but last Friday was kind of the big milestone called policy cutoff. So if there was a bill to do anything, change a rule about special education, anything but funding, because the budget's still in the process, anything to change any kind of existing state laws that had to come out of policy by last Friday. So WASDA says about 70% of all bills that touch something in education made it out of policy. But that's bills overall. So what a lot is going on right now is amendments and changing things. And so there are things that are still changing over time. Some that are specifically related to board directors. But then the other ones that we're kind of following relate to student health and safety, funding model equity, specifically one that I've had a lot of comments on, so I want to bring it up, is there's several bills, but it's around graduation requirements, assessments, and pathways, either pure delinking or delinking with new pathway requirements for graduation. And since it was brought up several times to me individually, I want to bring it up here. There's a bill, let me get it right, Substitute House Bill 1599, that lists out about 13 different pathways to demonstrate career and college readiness. So this opens up to earning high school credit in a career and technical education course, earning high school credit through an apprenticeship program, being accepted to an apprenticeship program, passing the Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery, passing an industrial-based credential exam. All of these are available pathways, but I'll read the current subsection, which is, I think, where we need to provide our input, and they've asked for our input. The bill, as it is, makes all the pathway options available, but it does not require districts to do them. Districts have a discretion in determining which pathway options they will offer to students, and they are specifically, they being the legislators, specifically seeking input from us of what pathways we want, what we want to expand. And so that's the main focus of what both WASDA and I think us as a school district can talk to our legislators about is these are what are important to us, making sure that they remain, even though the bill is out of committee. It can be amended as such over time. A little bit more, a little bit more than halfway left to go. Other related is the budget, which is, there's a lot of things happening in the budget related to fully funding special education, funding specific student health and safety items, funding model equity as well. One of the main things that they came up with is, overall, normally happens, planned expense is greater than planned revenue. So the amendments will have to basically cut new programs or cut expenses. And so making sure that legislators hear from us what we want to protect and what we want to see go forward, especially if it's new funding that wasn't there before. And so the unfortunate thing was actually the whole WASDA Day on the Hill was canceled because of the snow, yet to reschedule it. So it's just up to individual cohorts or delegates to talk to their legislatures. So let me know what you want. I'm sending it to them knowing that, graduation assessments are kind of the hot topic that I've heard a lot of you from, but keep sending ideas to me of what you want, as all bills that came out of committee are the only bills that can basically be approved into law. That'll be my condensed update.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Watts, report, please.
Yes, thank you. President Vengadaslam, members of the board, Ms. Howley, community, staff, and friends. First, I want to thank everyone who took time to be here this evening, that is, to share your concerns, to share your successes, and then to hear about the great work and also the areas that we still need to grow in Kent School District. One has to do with one of the more enjoyable events that I was able to attend this past week, and that was a rescheduling. Ironically enough, a lot of the snow themes will emerge this evening, but Kent Phoenix Academy graduation of the class of 2019. While there were 7 students who qualified as high school graduates, several of whom will continue to be successful, some as computer scientists, some who have aspirations to be physicians, automotive mechanics, whatever the goal that we have prepared them for. The idea, as I shared with them, is that each one of them was in fact an idea whose time had come. And they may have taken a different path, they may have taken a different amount of time, but the goal is that from empathy and equity that we address individual needs, and when those needs are met, whenever that time comes, success shows up. And I was proud to be a part of that ceremony. Speaking of snow, we know that we have about anywhere between 12, 18 inches that did fall, record snowfall during this region. I grew up here. I don't remember seeing that much snow at one particular time. But the reality is there were adults and students who were impacted, families were impacted. I was certainly, as a parent, I understand the challenges and frustrations that several of our families felt. Sometimes, as I've shared before, we have one of the most richly diverse school districts in the country, and some people don't realize that among that diversity is also geographic diversity. Several parts of our region, within the 71 square miles, some had 2 feet of snow, some had 6 inches, some had a light dusting that melted quickly, or quicker than most. So I want to thank, as I shared earlier, our operations team who worked diligently. We have a plan in place that worked to perfection, due in large part that we had a lot of practice opportunities. But the reality is, the goal is for one reason, is to make sure that our students, as well as the staff who serve our students, that they're safe. We've made recommendations that our students could not, our staff could not, our buses could not travel safely. And we are still working with our partners, City of Kent, Covington, and other municipalities to see how we can improve upon some of the safety measures that did take place. Third, recent board meeting, and I want to impress upon our board superintendent governance team, our community members, about the importance of learning. I think we heard that from our presentations today, the fact that we are a learning organization. We're not perfect. And just like teaching and learning, the fact is that we have to ensure that the opportunities for our students as well as our adults, that we're learning every day. This is an organization like the other 15,000 school districts where our task is simple. It's just not easy. The task is to make sure that every student who comes to us every day is better as a result of the adults who are learning how to be better as well. I do want to say that my most recent professional development experience at the Broad Academy provided an opportunity for our executive leadership team to help and impart knowledge and skills that start with empathy. And I've shared the idea of empathy interviews, interviewing students. The next phase is for us as a team to create our learning program that supports our instructional program. That's through our Plan, Do, Study, Act, or PDSA cycles that focus on data, how our students are performing. We saw an example of formative instructional practices. And if they're not performing where we expect them to be, how can we enrich their learning or reteach so that they understand and are able to do what we expect for them to do. Professional development for our adults is also a prime opportunity, but we can't know exactly how to address the needs of our adults and our students if we don't know who they are, if we don't ask them questions that help us understand, here's what empathy means. How can I walk in your shoes? And if I don't know you, I don't know your name, I don't know what your experiences are, I'm less likely to be able to help you in a broader way, in a more impactful way. That's our next opportunity as a team. We'll be sharing that information with, certainly with our board at a presentation coming soon to either a work session or a regular board meeting near us. And with that, I would like to say this. We celebrated Black History Month, certainly in the month of February. I do understand, certainly growing up in the state of Washington, having lived in Georgia for 21 years, having been raised in Washington State because of Jim Crow laws. My parents grew up in the Southeast, and I grew up here. And I realize that while we have great work in front of us, and there are challenges, if we listen to the news, sometimes we may hear some things that we don't like. But the reality is, if you look around this room, and you look at everyone here who comes from a different place, who may have a different name, who may have a different nationality, may speak a different languages, we are here for one purpose, and that's to make sure that our students are successful, that our adults are learning and achieving and leading in ways that one, we can only improve upon, and certainly we can celebrate in many ways. I want to thank our board. I want to thank our staff and our community. We care about all of our students. We care about all of our families, and I know we will be better as a result. Given that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Before we go on to our board member reports, this is not personal. Ken Smith, you were going to speak at the general public comment, and I've skipped you twice now. Was not intentional. So.
Thank you, President Ben Gadaslam. I think they were on one sheet, so it's easy to get lost or whatever. The item is public records requests, and just to bring to the board's attention, there are a significant number, which is not uncommon in a district that has had a certain set of financial or other challenges. I think the board might be wise to get an update on how many public records requests have been made, the status, how many of them are more than a month or so out, and maybe even the time that's being spent on them. And you could certainly compare that to other districts. I think you would want to do that. And just knowing that there are significant penalties for a district that does not comply with the Public Records Act, $100 a document a day for any violation. So I think it would behoove the board to do due diligence on asking the superintendent for a report, and it's something that should be talked about in public. It's a matter of public interest for the board. It's a public entity. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with Director Daniels first.
So I want to thank everybody for coming as usual. It's always really good to see all of you and everybody survive the weather, which is great. So I'm going to go a little different here. So I want to speak to the situation that occurred. And so what I want to share is that personally, my heart breaks for any student that is harmed by our district. And the opportunity to communicate with people is often difficult. And we do it typically, sometimes after the meeting, and I do remember hearing public comment about a situation and kind of waiting around to see if I could talk with the family, but somebody else was talking, but I did manage to reach out to one person. And I just, so I feel like it's a misstep if you have not, that I have not had the opportunity to say that I am truly sorry for that a student was harmed by the actions of a situation in our district. It is heartbreaking and difficult, with all of the legalities and those types of things, sometimes your hands are tied as to what you can do. I will say that I know that there was a show of support that happened at Green River Community College that I actually considered attending, but I had my daughter and not knowing how you'd be received because I saw a lot of nasty comments, and I couldn't subject my daughter to the potential of something that would go wrong because I wouldn't handle that well. And so just to know that, when situations happen, it does affect us, and so that is lost. I apologize for. We're held by, protocols and these things that oftentimes keep us from being able to respond in a way that we would like to at times. And so, but just know that I sincerely am sorry that a student was harmed by some of the actions of our district, and I do care, and I do have feelings about, as I know, I'm not going to speak for the board, but I hope that you understand that, and I do appreciate the heartfelt presentation and show that happened. So that's what I want to say. So.
We had several things planned that got dumped on by snow. We had the day on the hill that we were going to go to Olympia, talk to legislators. That was going to be a lot of fun, take students down there. Also had dual language visits planned for 3 different schools, and that got put out, but I'm going to get that rescheduled. We did do a tour of Covington Elementary School, the new Covington, and it is an absolutely beautiful school, state-of-the-art, amazing things going on that are now provided for those students. Beautiful, beautiful. And we met also, as we alluded to earlier, we met with the Covington City Council, and that was very interesting. I went to KPA graduation last night, and I love the winter graduation because it's always so intimate. There are just a few students, and we get to hear about each one of them and what their plans are. And even had time for when the mortarboard fell off of one of the girls, when a photo was being taken, we had time to stop and put the mortarboard on and get the picture taken, and there wasn't anybody coming up on the stage right behind it because it's just in the library. So that was really nice. And then Friday, I am going to, and I know you are too, going to be at Horizon Elementary reading to students again. I love doing that. It's going to be a big group this time. I'm going to have 3 classes that are going to be sitting, so I'm going to have to think up my strategy a little bit differently, but I'm looking forward to it.
All right. I said, there's a lot that was put off, but I realized that we had not had a regular board meeting since our last community conversations. We had them right after our last board meeting, and we have some tomorrow as well. And so I say, we've shared feedback about what we've heard, but what I say, the conversations were a lot more positive, a lot more about things that concerned people moving forward. We talked about everything from overload and capacity to boundaries to building level supports to all these actually, talking with the board more. And I had a lot more people reach out to me and hopefully they reach out to you as well, be interested in the policy work that the board is doing and being involved in that it doesn't just sit here with us and the district administration, that to the extent that we can shape the policy beyond what's required by WASDA or by law, that our community wants to have input into where that goes. And so we don't necessarily have a good forum for that right now, other than a community conversation, or even our work sessions don't really allow public comment. But that's something that I think that we should consider as we go forward as a big policy work that's ahead of us. So the other thing that I did last time, and I want to do this time as well, was kind of give a primer to the community conversations. 2 are tomorrow, 1 on Saturday. And give my thought on actually what happened recently, being the snow and the no school. I want to start a conversation, not necessarily tell you what we should do, but I've been hearing for the last year or more that we need to support our teachers and support our staff, both in either making sure they get the increases in salary that they've earned, or that they get the right amount of days that they've worked. They get all the money that is due them. And about a year since we've heard that the district needs to pay more attention to fiscal sustainability, stop wasting money, make sure that you are giving everything in service of the kids. And therefore, those two things, in my perspective, inform me to say that for every day that I would be able to pay a teacher to be in school, I want a kid to be in school. So no interest in waiving the required number of school days. But that's my opinion, and I want yours. And we can continue that discussion tomorrow. You can send me an email right now if I've really enraged you about it. And so that's where I'm looking forward to, is talking about that. Everybody's talking about it. Obviously, in some districts have already made decisions, but us being impacted both 2 weeks prior and then the whole week before spring break, we got to really think of, do we really want to shortchange our kids and our teachers and staff by just getting out of school early? So, thank you. That's my report.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, I will just say, along those lines, community conversations tomorrow. Ross and Karen are at Kentwood. I am at Kent Meridian. And then on Saturday, Debbie and Denise are at the Kent Senior Center. And we have stated this in our newsletter, but we have put in all our comments that have come from the community conversation on our website, the comments and questions and answers. And we're happy to clarify anything that you see there you'd like to discuss during our community conversations. I want to say, also add to that our board meetings are meetings held in public. It's not always a forum where we can engage in a discussion or express exactly how we feel about certain things. And I really encourage you to join us at our community conversations and have a more connected conversation with us. We've had some very open, honest discussions, and sometimes it's heated and sometimes it's very productive. And so I don't know if there are other school districts who do this regularly, and I think we really value hearing from you, and I think that's one of the reasons we do this every quarter. So we really welcome you to those conversations tomorrow and Saturday, tomorrow and Saturday morning. And I want to also thank our community groups for restarting the SEAC, our Special Education Advisory Committee meetings. I had a chance to meet with them, and there was a large group and great voices for those who are really wanting to get their voices out and don't have an opportunity. And I thank our community partners for really working with our district to promote that. And then also thank our PTA groups. Had a chance to meet with them and update them on what's happening, and thank our Covington community, Covington Council. So I'm trying to get the word out. Council and our mayor, Mayor Wagner, and all of the folks who work at Covington Elementary and the tour that they gave, and all of the partnership that we have with Covington. It's been a very strong one, and we really appreciate how they work with us and on many, many endeavors. And then finally, I want to state that I really apologize to our Kent Phoenix Academy parents and staff members for missing yesterday's graduation. Completely blew my schedule. And I usually don't miss any event, but want to apologize, and I'm glad, Karen, you are there to represent. So, and Ross, you're there. I know. So thank you, Karen. I think you're the only one who could make it. And with that, I want to thank you all for attending, and hope you have a great night tonight. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Normal place. Right. That's